Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started with today's stream. How you guys doing? I'm doing okay. It's been a week, I guess. If you were to look for sort of like an average week, this one kind of like bullseye with the dart. Really just kind of as they come kind of week. Not too many ups, not too many downs. It was overall, I guess I should take. Well, you guys don't have to deal with the reflection. Anything else? No game yesterday. We're off. We've entered the holiday season, as you well know. So trying to get a game together is interesting. So no game this week. My friend ran the game last week on the Fridays, and so I'll be back in the seat this coming Friday. No real prep that I need to do for that because they are smack in the middle of a little adventure, and I've already plotted that all out. Their own little sort of wilderness dungeon, I guess is how I would describe it. There's a very interesting article that's an Angry GM article, I think, from many years ago at this point, talking about how, and it is true, how basically everything can be a dungeon. Cities can be a dungeon. Wilderness can be a dungeon. When you think about dungeon, it's just a connection of a series of rooms or scenes or however you want to do it, areas. Then you can make a wilderness adventure the same way that you script out a dungeon adventure. Like, yeah, sure, there's not technically walls that bind them within that, but assuming that your players and their characters are motivated to actually go after the goal, they're probably going to move often we like to move in as straight a line as possible. So if you take like a plot line dungeon, which is how I do most of my dungeon mapping anyways, rather than actually doing it by 5x5 squares, it's very similar. So I've got one right now where they're climbing up and around this mountain where they are searching for a hermit. They don't know exactly where he is on the mountain. He kind of moves around. And so they are in the process of going through that. The mountain's also very dangerous. This hermit lives, and he is often surrounded by quite dangerous things. It's one of the things that, like, a lot of people leave him alone about because it's kind of difficult to get there, and you got to find him, and you got to deal with some of the native flora and fauna that are there, as well as his own traps. Like, he has trapped part of the mountain as well, because again, when you're your own person living out in the wilderness, anybody could come by and accost you. That might be the wildlife, or that might be monsters, or that might be bandits, or kingsmen, or whoever it is. If you want to be just away from everybody, you set up some deterrence. Let's put it that way, deterrence, because generally most people are not coming to find you to ask you a question, unless you're the PCs in this campaign, because they are definitely going to find Wise Halamuth of the Mountain, so they can ask him specific questions about something that's going on in the adventure that they are pursuing at the moment, trying to figure out what he knows about the Vegemins. That's Vegapygmies, but we're calling them Vegemins. In the world, and why were they displaced, and why are some of them going crazy? They seem to be sick with something, some sort of blight, plant blight. And so they're trying to figure out some of that. So they've gone to Wise Halamuth of the Mountain to ask him what he knows upon the subject. Both the Vegemins and the blight. So, but because I've already mapped out that adventure, that's one of the ways that I like to do it. There's session prep that I do in between for each individual sessions, and then once they kind of go on to a longer, the dungeons are always very short. A shorter dungeon-esque kind of adventure, a location adventure, we'll put it that way. That's how they like to talk about it in 5e24. A location adventure where you go into a place to do a thing, generally finding a thing, recovering a thing, stopping the cult, whatever it is. You need to go to a place, it's a place you're not going to be familiar with, so you need to crawl through it and do that stuff. But you can take that stuff, and usually that's a dungeon, but you can also just make it a wilderness location like I did with this mountain. They are climbing up and around. Maybe after I'm done running the mountain, we'll go over it. I know that some of my players also do watch these videos, or watch these streams, so I don't necessarily want to let the cat out of the bag first. We'll go over it afterwards, and then who knows, maybe I'll make one with you guys coming up. I don't know what the next one's going to be. Who knows? It kind of depends on what they do. I don't even know if they're going to be successful on this adventure, much less what they're going to go do after the adventure. So try not to plan too far out in front. Let them figure out whether they're going to succeed here or fail here, or as has been the case in previous parts of the campaign, where they will just abandon an adventure very early on, which has happened. So we'll have to see what they do. Let's see other things. We're going to play D&D tomorrow. That's the campaign that I play in, that I run. We're going to do a bunch of downtime. I think we've got like 2 months of downtime we're going to do. So we've got like 8-9 weeks. So we've got some stuff that's happening in there. One of our player characters has their Iron Chef debut with Faye Guy Fieri, and they will do that, and they're going to cook their master level dish, which I believe is a cockatrice. So we've got to hunt another cockatrice, and she also has the special magical, I can't believe it's not butter that she's going to probably use with it, as well as some other herbs and spices, primarily from under the sea, to season up her food to try to win this competition. In addition to that, we have one of our NPCs where the entire campaign is centered around basically our ship, the Sea Devil's Bane. And so it's centered around that ship. And so in addition to the PCs that we have, which are 3, there are a number of NPCs that are also kind of the crew of the ship. They have their own stuff going on. And so part of our downtime will be dealing with some of their things. Most specifically, we have a bard in tow as one of our sidekick NPCs. And he has to he's trying to win a bunch of money in a big like Battle of the Bands kind of competition in the same town that we're doing the Iron Chef thing in. And so we've got to be very careful about that because he's also got basically his record label gave him a huge advance for a lot of money, and now he's in a lot of debt to them, and they've already sent some knee breakers after him. So we have to protect him while he does that, and hopefully he will make enough money on stage to at least be able to, get the attack dogs to stop coming at him. I doubt that he's going to get the full payout because, as we now call him, he's the 10,000 gold man. Because that's how much he's in debt to them, I believe, is 10,000 gold, which is a lot of money for us. We're level 8, so it's still a lot of money even for us. It's like we can't just pay that debt off, man. We don't have that money, and even if we could, we probably wouldn't, because that's a ton of money. Look, Colm, we like you as an NPC. We don't like you that much. we don't like you that much. We don't like you 10,000 gold much. Let's see, anything else that's going on? I think that's mostly it. So today we're going to jump in and we're going to talk a little bit more. Off the previous streams, we talked about some OSR-lite elements and kind of pulling that in for dungeons and how to make dungeons better. So this time we're going to do it in, and it's probably going to do a series, because I think I got at least one more of these in the tank that I need to work on. Which I think is we're going to talk about some of the social aspects of it. We kind of did all the exploration kind of aspects. And we might do a full hex crawl and talk a little bit more about logistics of hex crawling and doing that, because I do feel like that is an area in 5e24 where there are a lot of dungeon masters that aren't familiar with hex crawling and doing those sorts of aspects of adventure design, which can add a lot to the game as opposed to the very plot-driven narrative. I think it's been my experience is that trying to plan adventures and campaigns the way that basically contemporary D&D wants you to do it, the WASI method, is a lot of work on a dungeon master's part, that you're basically having to write almost a novel, and in that, but you're also not in control of the characters who are the main characters of that novel. That means you're constantly rewriting stuff. You're constantly changing stuff. You constantly have to, because you never know when things that they're going to pass, or the ways that they're going to get around things, or ways they're going to miss clues, or those sorts of things. So I feel like that's a very heavy prep, constant prep thing. And that's, I think, one of the primary things that pushes Dungeon Masters towards burnout. Whereas right now the campaign that I'm running is very, has a lot of hex crawl elements, let's put it that way. And so I spent uploaded a lot of prep. So I spent a few hours making the hex crawl map, throwing points of interest in there, and then fleshing out the points of interest as they come across them a little bit more. I don't need to do all the prep, but it's like I have a pretty large area that I prepped, and be like, okay, now I know where everything is in here, and I kind of know everybody who's playing around in the sandbox. Basically, I'm creating the sandbox for them. And once I know everybody that's in the sandbox, then it just depends on where they go and the things that they decide that are important to them. And then as that happens, that plot or that narrative for me reveals itself, rather than me having to come up with it in the very beginning as a dungeon master. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in next problems, but that's, I don't know why I'm going into that. That's not what we're talking about today. Today we're going to focus specifically in on content. This is going to be a pretty talky head video. I don't really have a lot of examples. I'm not pulling up like a VTT to show you anything, because I don't think that's going to be, probably worth the amount of effort that's going to put into it, because most of this stuff is going to be really, really simple, which makes sense because OSR play is kind of assumes that you're not playing with a grid most of the time. And then changes to it. But we are going to talk a little bit about those OSR elements, those OSR-lite elements that we're going to pull into contemporary D&D, where we can get sort of the biggest bang for our buck, where we can get most of those OSR elements, the things that are naturally missing from 5e24, and adding that back into contemporary D&D without some of the other stuff that we talked about last time, which was like a lot of the bookkeeping and things like that, that kind of pushes people, I feel like, away from OSR. It definitely is one of the things that kind of keeps me away from playing more OSR, is some of the bookkeeping stuff, and very much the randomness of it, which can be a hassle. But today we want to talk specifically about combat, because combat is something that I think that OSR does really, really well, because, and we'll talk about basically the primary tenets of what I think OSR combat is. So combat is really deadly. It's generally not your first option. Because the lethality of it is very, very high. It is fast. You can do, I don't know how many OSR combats in the time it takes to do a standard 45-minute 5e24 combat. You can probably get 3, maybe 4 of those combats in, depending on what's going on in an OSR combat. Hit points are low, damage is high, initiative is very easy to track. People kind of, when people go all the time. It's very, very simple. There are lots of elements that are like save or die, stuff like that. So there's this fast and furious nature to it. It's also a system where OSR in general, that old school system, is very much rulings over rules. 5th edition 5e24 is pushed a little bit more towards that, away from 3rd edition and 4th edition, which very much focused a lot more on rules. We're going to put out finite rules for all these situations. That's one of the reasons why when you see like a Pathfinder book that they're like textbook thick, as opposed to even the 5th edition or 2024 books, which are, they're not pamphlets, but they're not 600-page books either. So trying to find that, but it's also not the OSR pamphlets, at least as far as OD&D is. But even very early books. A full rule cyclopedia is what, like, I don't know how many, I don't know how many pages the rule cyclopedia is. I'm talking out my butt. That has me, I'm just going to look. I know I have it, at least a digital format of it. So I'm just going to look for it. Let me see if I can find it real quick. I was like, I don't know. Actually, know how many pages are in here. So let's just go have a look. And let me get a page number here. I guess I know. Oh no, there are the page numbers. Oh yeah, it's got like 300 pages on it. Which is, what does the player's handbook even have in it? Player's handbook 2024. How many pages you got in here? Yeah, it's smaller than the player's handbook. And the rule cyclopedia holds all the rules. And it holds all the rules for pretty much Beck Me. So, and that goes way high, by the way. Because there's all the rules for the D&D box sets series, including Basic, Expert, Companion, and Masters. Okay, so it doesn't have Immortals in it. Right, it does not have Immortals in it. But it does have Basic, Expert, Companion, and Masters, which already takes you up to I don't even know what level 30? Is that right? Level 30? No, that may be Immortals territory. Doesn't matter. Anyways, say that the rules are definitely lighter because it's got this emphasis on rulings over the rules, rather than putting everything out in, black ink. Be like, we're going to give you the basic ideas about how to adjudicate stuff, and then you adjudicate stuff. And so when you do that, it means that there's a lot more player ingenuity. There's a lot more wiggle room for the players to try some silly stuff. And for the dungeon master to be like, yes, or no, that won't work. and come up with more clever plans and tactics using the terrain, improvisation kind of things. Using magic items are very weird things. That's why anytime that you come across like an old D&D spell or an older D&D magic item, sometimes they'll have this brick of paragraphs that's like, here are the caveats that that this will not work for. That's why you have things like the bag of holding has to tell you about like what happens when the bag of holding rips, or what happens when you open an extraplanar space in an extraplanar space. And because players used to do that stuff, and they'd be like, how much air is in here? Because can we put people in here? And like, those are the sort of things that come out of older editions of D&D that they finally were like, this comes up often enough that we need to codify how that interaction happens. Now, I do think some of that could be walked back. I don't think we necessarily need it as much in the 5e24 days as we kind of push more towards those rulings over rules kind of thing. But I get the addition that 6th edition, whenever it's coming out, and trust me, it will be coming out. They will not let it lie. It won't lie fallow for long. They are definitely already working on it. They do. That's just how WotC does this. They come out with an edition. After some number of years, they have a half edition that comes out. And as soon as they basically publish this half edition, they immediately start working on the next edition of D&D. It's just sort of a add-on. It is essentially D&D DLC, and they've been doing this for decades. So I know the 6th edition is coming. You should know the 6th edition is coming. I do think in 6th edition we will see another push towards more rules over rulings. We'll see it move back, I think, towards that 3rd edition, 4th edition thing, because that is something that happens when the company itself, the parent company, wants to be more in control of what is and is not D&D. It happened with TSR, and it happens with WotC. And so I think now, as D&D has already hit sort of its peak popularity, at least for now, and it's very much dwindling off, I feel, anyways. It's definitely not nearly in the zeitgeist that it was 5 years ago. Especially, I mean, the pandemic, COVID really was a huge boost, along with Stranger Things, along with Critical Role. There was just a lot of things that were in the right place at the right time that kind of fell into place. It's the right opportunity for D&D. And it's going to be a while till that happens again, I think. So I think D&D will, because of WotC and because of Hasbro, they will try to throttle that control over D&D, which unfortunately does tend to sometimes kill the hobby, and did kill the hobby for a long time. So we'll see how it goes. Those are my thoughts. And we're going to also talk about unbalanced encounters. That's something that old school D&D just doesn't care about. They're like, old school D&D has this really funny thing. Funny, it's just a different way of looking at it. So in contemporary D&D, we're like, okay, you're going to run into goblins. You're this level. That means that you should be able, an average fight, which is basically a winnable fight that, you'll take some damage and you'll use some resources, is X number of goblins. In old school D&D, no mention of your level at all. It's really, instead we look at hit dice, which we'll talk about today. At hit dice, how many hit dice a creature has. That's how a lot of things are done, not really their CR. There's no such thing as CR. And instead of being like, oh, this is the appropriate number of goblins for this level and number of player characters, it's like, hey, when goblins show up, there's generally a group of about this many goblins. So it doesn't matter if you are a first level party in OSR D&D, or you're a 10th level party of D&D adventures in OSR. If you run into goblins, you're going to continue to run into, I don't know, whatever it is, like 3d4 plus 2 goblins whenever you run into goblins. that's generally how many goblins you're going to run into. It doesn't care about your level, and it does tell you that when you run into them, whether you should engage them or whether you should run away from them. So, which is one of the big changes in contemporary D&D is like when you create a number of monsters to fit specifically the number of player characters that are going to show up in the scene, fighting is always an option. Whereas in old school kind of D&D, fighting is often not an option. It's not something you want to pursue. In general, when you walk in, there's three of you. You know, there's a fighter and there's a cleric and there's a magic user, and you guys walk in, and there's 20 goblins in there in your first level, and you go, well, obviously, we can't fight these guys. These guys will kill us, and it won't take very long. And so you're like, okay, how do we have to be ingenious and get around this? That's one of the things Unbalanced Encounters focuses on. And then we'll also talk about morale checks, but I'll end up rolling morale checks in under another heading. I don't really feel like it's worth its own heading. I think it's just a very simple implement that you put into the game. It's one of the things that I use to make the games faster, because you get monsters that, well, you don't have to whittle down all their hit points to 0. So that's probably going to go under the Fast and Furious category, I assume. And again, this is going to be pretty much a talking head video. There's not a lot for me to show you today. It's just going to be me kind of rambling on about stuff. So, perfect is what we call that second monitor content, huh? So if you're prepping for a game or something, like pull that open, start working on this, or playing a game. What are the kids playing now? Marvel Rivals, I guess. I don't know what else is out right now. There's a new Masquerade game, but it's obviously not supposed to be very good. It's not Agency, the new one that's like the superhero one. A different superhero game that's not Marvel Rivals. Guy from Breaking Bad in it, who's the voice of the main character. Doesn't matter. Aaron Paul. Yeah, I don't remember the name of it. It's not Agency, but it's something like that. Not important. Not what we're doing here. All I'm saying is that this is going to definitely be more of a listener episode. So I know as beautiful as my face is and how you must look at it, throw it over on the second monitor. Keep it up. Go prep your game. If you're watching this, go prep your game instead, and just keep this on in the background while you're doing it. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to jump in. We said we were going to start off with combat is deadly. And this is just a good thing to learn, just kind of out the bat, that combat is a lot more than kind of the number and CR of monsters. 5e in 2024 really breaks it down to being just kind of that for the most part. Like, that's how they tell you to balance encounters, is like the number of monsters that you have and the difficulty of those monsters. And that's what you need to create an encounter. But it's like, no, there's so much more than that if you really want to make good encounters. And that's not to be like, I don't want this to be overwhelming. It's not like, oh my gosh, there's so much work you've got to do. No, it's like, look at all this extra stuff you get to add into the game, and you pick and choose it. Like I say, it's like an herbs and spices blend. You're grabbing different stuff and throwing it in the pot of combat, in your combat pot, to cook up different flavors. Right? At the end of the day, your basics, you're gonna have like some chicken and some different vegetables in that, and those are kind of the monsters you choose. And then we're going to throw these spices in there and be like, oh, the method that we're going to use is a little bit different. This time we're going to fry it. This time we're going to steam it. We're going to bake it, etc. So now we're just doing, what it does is it gives us a lot of options, so that way we're not limited only to the number and the CR of monsters that we use. It can be really, really limiting when you're trying to make a combat. So let's talk about the things that you can add to that. We're talking about conditions, terrain, cover, visibility. All these things are really, really important in creating a combat, a nice, robust combat mix, that nice, effervescent mix of those herbs and spices, the special blend, if you will. So we have air, water, difficult or impassable terrain, elevations, jumps, climbing. That's just basic terrain stuff for the most part. So air. We always assume that there's air in an encounter. There's no reason you can't have a chamber that's full of I don't know, poisonous gas, that's a problem. If it's some sort of, you can set up a vacuum situation. Underwater combat, of course, deals a lot with doing things like air, where air is really important, or in some other sort of, like, anything that would deny air from your creatures. This is even air. You could take it and be, like I said, I'm running a mountain adventure right now. And my mountain's pretty small that they're on. That's got Halimith. It's not a big mountain, but if it was a big mountain, air could be a very important thing, where the air is very thin up there, and they might get elevation sickness. Just something they would have to contend with in combat, which essentially I would probably run as if they had the poison condition. Either the poison condition or the first level of exhaustion. I mean, the first level of exhaustion and poison condition are exactly the same, which is that you have disadvantage on ability checks. So yeah, I'd probably use exhaustion as the first one, so that way if you stay up there more and you got yourself even more and more tired, it becomes more and more of an issue. But yeah, the idea is that you can have thin air, you can have poisonous air, you can have... oxygen is generally an assumed thing, but it doesn't have to be an assumed thing in your combats. You can always be like, there's a reason why there would not be here, or maybe there's, you know, a bunch of smoke, because stuff's on fire, or lots of things that make it very difficult to breathe. And when you make it difficult to breathe, you get to pull in things like the suffocation rules. Now, I think the suffocation rules, and aka the drowning rules, are not very good in 5e24, so that's something that I would change, because it's a little silly to be like, oh, you can totally hold your breath for, you're a barbarian, so obviously you can hold your breath for like 4 minutes. No, you can't do that, especially not when you're actively running. That's running around doing stuff in like strenuous, very stress-inducing things like combat. Like, you can't, that's not how that works. Can people hold their breath that long? Yes, absolutely. Very much so. But generally, that's not while they're doing a lot of physical exertion. That's not how it works. It's just one of those things where stats like that, visibilities like that, there are a lot of little needlesome things that are in D&D's rules where you're just like, well, that doesn't really make sense, because that's not really how that works. That sometimes you don't need to, but you might want to address, especially if you're trying to bring more that verisimilitude, that, which is our big fancy $5 word for just being like, make it a little bit more realistic. You can do stuff like that. So that's air. As for water, water is a great way to just challenge players in general. Is force them into the water, because most player characters are not built with the water in mind. Especially if you're playing and you're like, ugh, but there's only so many adventures I can have, like on the coast or in a lake. And it's like, if you do anything in a dungeon, anything in a sewer, anything that's underground, the underground is absolutely littered with water pockets, with all sorts of like aqualuces and aquifers and underground lakes and cenotes and all sorts of stuff, underground rivers, all that stuff, springs. You can go into all that stuff. So if you're doing anything that's underground, whether that's even going into basements and buildings, absolutely can have flooded basements very easily. Especially when D&D gives us quite a bit of aquatic monsters. A lot of monsters that have the ability to swim and either hold their breath or breathe underwater. Oftentimes being able to breathe air and water. So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of use that. I've used it a lot, especially if you do things like marshes or swamps. So you can do it outside in the world, you can do it within the cities, you can do it kind of wherever. You add a lot more water into that, because that slows your characters down. If they go underwater, they have to deal with the breathing aspect. But it also means that they can't use verbal components of their spells generally, if they can't breathe. If they don't have a swim speed, anything they do that's not piercing, they have disadvantage on the attacks. So it's a really, really powerful way to... And even though it doesn't technically work this way, you could also do it where like maybe fire magic doesn't work as well underwater. Technically that's not how that works, but I think you could make a pretty good argument for it as the Dungeon Master and be like, well, you try to do fireball underwater, it's not as effective as it would be above water. So you might give people... advantage on the dexterity saves, which is not them getting out of the way, but the fire is less effective underwater. You could do things like that. So just adding something like water in can make a huge difference in your combats. It doesn't have to be a lot. You can just do like, you know, you can hide traps in water. So if you're only hiding traps in water, you can only needs to be like shin high. So it doesn't even reduce necessarily movement. It totally wrecks their ability to do stealth, though. Water makes a ton of noise if people are trying to go through it, especially walk through it. They make a ton of noise. You can hide all sorts of traps and stuff like that underneath there, hazards or obstacles like hidden sinkholes and all sorts of fun stuff that's in there. You can that's a little bit more dungeon crawly, but if you want to add that as part of a combat, which is very fun, you should definitely occasionally add some traps or hazards as part of your combat, just to spice things up and make them have to deal with it, make your players have to deal with it. And your monsters sometimes, if they're like hazards and obstacles that they don't know are there. Let's see. Other things. I think that's just about it for water. Water is just a really, really fun, really easy thing to add to combat that just makes everything just a little bit more difficult for most player characters. And you don't have to do like a pirate adventure or something like that to add water. Water is everywhere. You can always, if they're underground, like I said, if they're underground or they're in the sewers or they go into a flooded basement, anything like that, there's just water everywhere that you can get into. Marshes and swamps and rivers and lakes, and very easy to get more water into your campaign. And because it's and frankly, it's just a really big pain in the butt to deal with as an adventurer, unless you have a swim speed. Which, assuming that you weren't planning to play a more maritime kind of campaign, like the campaign I'm playing on Sundays ended up being where you spend a ton of time underwater. Actually, more time underwater generally than above water on dry land. Terra firma. To her own dungeon master chagrin, he was like, we've been underwater way too much. This is such a pain in the butt to deal with. Like, yeah, doing a full campaign underwater is a pain in the butt, because then you have to do the Z-axis for everything, and it is a pain. So I definitely commiserate with him on that. But every once in a while it's fun to throw in, especially because you're planning it. You're the dungeon master, so you're planning the underwater aspects. Your players are not going to be prepared for it generally, so they're going to have to figure out what to do on the fly, which gives them just an extra little wrinkle of things that they have to deal with. And really kind of adds that robustness, that nice umami flavor to your combat dish that you're cooking up. Same thing with that, is elevation, jumping and climbing, creating any sort of combat and where the Z-axis, that's up and down, matters, is immediately going to make your combat more interesting, especially if you start leaning in on some of the 5e24 optional rules, which you kind of have to be careful with, because it can get really abused by players very, very easily and very often. If you're like, oh, well, high ground gives you advantage, which is something that's in the books. If you have a high ground, then you're going to have advantage on your attacks. And oftentimes, if you're on the lower ground, then you're going to have disadvantage on your attacks. Generally, I try to make it as try to use the cover rules a little bit more for that, just because it's a little bit more interesting. A little bit more nuanced than just being like you have advantage or disadvantage, and then it's just kind of everybody always trying to get to the high ground and stay on the high ground, which is interesting for a combat. It's not interesting for every single combat out there. You don't want every combat to just be like one big game of King of the Hill. You want it to be something that gets used sometimes. But it is a great way to do that, as well as how you get across that terrain. Different ways to get up and down. There are stairs, obviously, ramps, ladders, just ropes, some sort of climbable wall. What if it's a sheer cliff? This is one of the things where you can really make somebody pop if they have something like a climb speed, which might often not come up very often, and be like, oh, here's a spot where they can just get to because they have the climb speed, and so they don't move at half pace. They're not slowed when they're climbing. They can do that, or good time. One of the things that used to really, really plague, I feel like, Pathfinder, I'm going to say first edition, or at least my memories from playing a lot of Pathfinder first edition, is, man, did we get a lot of scrolls that jump. And be like, these are really worthless most of the time. But if you have a lot more fights where the Z-axis, where that elevation matters, suddenly jumps incredibly powerful. because it gives you the ability to move to places where people think they are inaccessible to you. So enemies that are, up on the wall shooting down at you with either magic or bows, and you can just jump up there real quick and get into melee with them. Or gives you the ability to basically do the reverse of that, which is make yourself inaccessible. So if you throw it on the wizard, and then the wizard jumps up on the cliff above and can just rain down magic on all the bad guys below, and not have to worry about one of them running up and whacking him with a sword or club or whatever the case may be. Kind of gets him out of danger in your wizard in an area where they can just fire down upon the enemies. Similarly, difficult and impassable terrain, that's a great way to funnel combat. There's Index Card RPG. I'm not going to go I should have pulled it off my shelf to show this. Let me see if I have I think I have. So, actually, I am going to show something. RPG. Because there is, in ICRPG, there's a really, really nice version of this. Great system. Big fan. We played it a while back as a one-shot. Really enjoyed it. Oh, nope, this is not the right thing. Those are the index cards. There we go. I looked up index card instead of ICRPG. Let me see. Because there is a thing where it talks about the game mastery section of ICRPG is very, very good. It's going to be really different than probably most Dungeon Master sections you've seen in a book, and that kind of makes it worth picking up. And I think you can get the basic rules, I think, for free right now, or at least you used to be able to. And if you do that, I think it's got this stuff in it. I don't think you have to get the paid version for this. I have the paid version. Let me take a look. One moment. I'm going to move this over. This is not the right one. That's what I'm looking at. Let's do this. Alright, so this is the game mastery section. So yeah, where are the heroes? What is their goal? Really, really like basic, good nuts and bolts, like how to be a good DM. The game mastery section in ICRPG is very, very good. So if you're absolutely new, I definitely say like this is a thing to go look out, check out. Like I said, I think you can get maybe not this version. This is an older version of the game, but I think you can get newer version, the basic version, for free, and I think it has this game mastery section in it. Session planning and the session, easy and hard, hearts. Turn order, we talked about that last time. We'll talk about that a little bit this time too. Words, dynamic dice, story architecture, encounter architecture. Here we go. So it's going to do a lot of things. The danger, energy, wonder. Your 3 T's, your timers, threats, and treats, which is a really great way to do encounter design. Goes into that a little bit, but really what I really want to get us to is that it has these templates, which I think do a really great job of showing terrain and how to use blocking, essentially blocking, like theater blocking, but for your encounters, your combat encounters. Here we go. Your encounter archetypes. So we'll see that. And they're kind of drawn up almost like American football kind of plays. So you can kind of see how it looks like. And there are quite a few of these, and then he goes into sort of what they look like. Okay, so barrier. Like it says at the top, each one's got the nice little pull quote on it. Get a rope. You got a thing that's in your way, you need to get over that thing. The tangle is like you can't get too close to the wall, so it just kind of pushes you towards the middle of the room that you need to go through. There's the lock, you need to get the key so you can get through the lock so you can get through the next door. The kite, which is pulling enemies through with you. The pinch is a choke point, essentially. The ambush is where you break up line of sight in the room, so that way you're going around the corner and then you're gonna find them. The siege is like what we were talking about with the elevation, where the elevation would be really important, where you have to like make it up to the top. Where traversal is an important part of it. So you can see that difficult terrain and that climbing and how you would do that in the siege. And the tightrope, very similar. It's like you're basically in a channel that you need to go through, and the bad guys are up at the top. If you have that jump, you can get up there. If you don't have that jump, well, that's going to be tough for you. And the nice thing about all these encounter archetypes is that they all have the assumption that the PCs are the active ones in these rooms. That doesn't actually have to be the case. When we talk about, sometimes you can have different goals in combat. The goal is not always kill all the enemies or get through the next room. Sometimes it's you've got to stop them from doing something. And so if you put yourself in a position as Dungeon Master where you're like, okay, the player characters need to stop the bad guys from doing stuff, and then you can do, the one that made me think about that is this tightrope one. If you do the reverse of that and be like, you guys are on the periphery, and you can see the bad guy going from point A to point B, and you really don't want him to get to point B for whatever reason. Whatever, he's got the MacGuffin, he's got the power source, he's got whatever it is. He's got the key, etc. You can set up this encounter where it's them trying to get to the person, stop them before they can run through the room, essentially. It's a very fun way to do an encounter instead. The ally kite, very similar, and the duel, which is just, the duel is kind of what the 5e24 bog standard combat is. You walk into a room, there's nothing in the room, it's you, bad guys, mono a mono, that's it. And it's probably the least interesting thing you can do. It is the bog standard because it's one of the things that you find out as you go through 5e24, especially as you look at hazards and obstacles and tricks and traps. Our usual HOTS are HOTTs. You look through that and you know, most of these don't have XP values to it. So the only things that have XP values to it are monsters. It's hard to determine how do you balance an encounter by adding traps to it or adding hazards to it. D&D, the designers are, we're not gonna say lazy. We're gonna say that is trying to come up with some sort of rubric to create combats in which all that other stuff is important. All that other stuff is important, whether you have air or water in the room, if there's difficult or impassable terrain, if there's elevation changes, if there are hazards, if there are obstacles, if there are traps that you need to contend with. There's so much stuff that you can add to that it becomes almost impossible to create a rubric in which you can balance all those things. So instead they focus only on balancing the monsters. But the unfortunate thing is that as new dungeon masters come in, especially, the default is this guy right here. It's this guy right here. It's that most combats end up like this. Player characters enter on one side, monsters already in the room, you fight till one of you is no more. Or one of you runs away. Generally, till one of you is no more. Most generally, the bad guys. Because we're using balanced encounters, probably in 5e24, which means that player characters are able to stomp them generally pretty easy. Because nothing, and it's not interesting. You can look at it, it's a blank room. It's not interesting to look at. And so one of the things that we want to do with some of this other stuff is we're trying to zhuzh up that combat, add those extra herbs and spices that we're trying to change the flavor profile of that combat. Man, this food metaphor is working all right, I guess. Really easy to drop into that. So yeah, so that's enough. We don't need to look at that anymore. But yeah, that gives you an idea of what we're talking about as far as that stuff, the conditions. One of the other things that we didn't notice is that other stuff, and we talked about some of that in the encounter archetypes, but using things like pillars and shelving and other furniture, walls, creating wide and narrow spaces, curves and turns to break line of sight, just like that ambush encounter has, where it's like an S kind of curve. So doing that where you don't have a lot of line of sight on things. This is something that my Dungeon Master in my game tomorrow has feels like he struggles with sometimes. He's like, oh, well, you guys kind of romp over most of the combat challenges. It's like, oh, yeah, I mean, you got to think about the specifics of the characters and what they're really good at, and making sure that you also hit us with things that we're really weak at. We're talking about it back and forth. It's like, well, we don't really do a lot of AoE damage, which means we don't control mobs very well. So if you throw us a bunch of little creatures, we're really good. We're really good at like locking in on one target and dealing with that target. But if you give us a whole bunch of little targets, we're not very good at essentially clearing the deck. We can't clear the deck very easily. Our magic caster doesn't have a ton of AoE spells. I only have a couple, and most of them are very tactical. They're not damage dealing ones. And our barbarian doesn't really have any spells at all, surprisingly. So it's a very easy way to. That's a very big blind spot in our group, is because we don't have a big AoE caster to deal with mobs. And so doing things with like that, where you can change things up. And what I was trying to get to was line of sight is really important, because I have a ranged character that has a longbow and has a way to negate disadvantage and get advantage on a lot of attacks, which means that he's almost always rolling with advantage when he rolls to attack, and he has a really, really good bonus to hit, because he has the archery fighting style, so he gets an extra bonus. And so he usually takes what is essentially power attack to get him what is the normal bonus to attack for most ranged characters, and he has advantage on that attack. And if he does, he gets to hit with like his dice plus 11 damage per hit, and he's gonna hit most of the time when he has advantage, which is essentially giving him a plus 5 to his attack most of the time, mechanically. So, big issue. But you know what? You can't shoot arrows through walls. So if you break line of sight, whether that's through fog, well, it can't be fog, because it can't be something that I would just get disadvantage on, because I couldn't negate that. It has to be something where I literally cannot, there's no line of sight, line of effect between me and what I'm trying to get to, my player character is trying to get to. Because I can't shoot arrows through walls. Yet. We'll see in the future. Maybe I'll get some specialty ammo that's just like blow walls the hell up. Some explosive arrows or something. I'll go full Hawkeye. I'll have a trick bag of a whole bunch of stupid arrows that I can pull out for really ridiculous things. Like, of course, I prepped the exploding arrows, the shaped explosive arrows that just blow holes in walls. Of course I did that. Now, we do have one of our NPCs on our ship is an artificer, so could make something like that. Is already somewhat skilled in explosives and firearms. We're getting way into the weeds on that. But yeah, anyways, you look at what your player characters are strong at. If you feel like they're kicking over your encounters a whole bunch, they're really, kicking stuff over, and you're like, okay, what are they doing well? What are the things that are really pinching me? How do I deny them that? So for my character, it's generally line of sight. So it's like, you got to get me line of sight and line of effect out of the way. Exceptionally hard to do in underwater, which is how we fight most of the time, because once you introduce the Z-axis, my character can always just swim up and can get basically visibility, line of sight on almost everything on the battlefield. Doesn't matter how tall the walls are, he can always just, because we're so far down, he can always just swim higher. And when he has 600 feet that he can basically get to, it means he can hit anything that even tries to run, he can still hit, make sure it doesn't run. He's a very good mop-up character. He's very good if you have routed the enemy. He will mop them up for you very easily. And he has a swim speed now, which is very helpful as a ranger. Other things to include: obscurement. That's light and heavy obscurement, which is essentially visibility, but we call it obscurement in 5e24 for some reason. So it's darkness and dim light and bright light and foliage and fog clouds and fog and stuff like that. So using things like that, especially anything that's a sensory blocker, is really helpful in combat if you want to make things different. Like, one of the things that you can do is... Actually, I don't even know if that's standard the rule. I don't think that's the rule anymore. I think that used to be the rule in D&D and Pathfinder, but I don't think it is anymore. Let me see. I'm gonna look up the condition deafness real quick. Alright, you can blind or deafen a foe. This is the spell, not the condition. Yeah, I need the condition. There we go. There's conditions. Deafened creature can't hear and automatically fails any ability check that requires hearing. So yeah, this is one of the things that's not standard in 5e24, but used to be kind of standard in older editions that I would probably roll back in, is that you basically have to make a spell casting check if you are deafened to use a spell that has verbal components. Because trying to talk when you can't hear is wonky. As well as trying to do things like stealthing when you can't hear because you have no idea how loud you are. We've all had this experience where either you, like me, are wearing headphones, or you're around somebody who wears headphones and they don't realize how loud they're being because they can't hear themselves and they can't hear the like ambient environment. Doing stuff like that can really, really screw with a rogue really easily. Be like, oh, you can't really hear, so it's really difficult for you to stealth right now. Doing that. So any sort of sensory blockers that do that, like deafened, is really good for it. It also means that you guys can't communicate if you don't have message or telepathy of some type. Can't talk to each other. Obscure means that it's really easy for if you have ambush monsters, like go-to examples are things like ropers or mimics, things that look like things. Already are extremely hard to detect. Actually, those aren't very good examples because technically you can't detect them. That's how their stat blocks work, is that they just look like the object until they move. They're actually indecipherable. It says in the stat block they are indecipherable from mundane objects. Anything that's like an animated object or tends to be an object. So that's actually not a good example. I was trying to avoid using Dark Mallow because Dark Mallow is what comes to mind. Cloakers are the same way. Any sort of ambush predator like that. Displacer beasts. Invisible stalkers. Those sorts of things. So anything that you can put in an additional sensory blocker. Another good one's like smell. There are a number of characters or sidekicks, or sometimes, you know, if you're smart, your players just get a dog. They spend like 25 gold to get a dog, because it's really nice to have a creature in the party that has advantage on smelling and hearing checks to see invisible things. And then adding in sensory blockers like, oh, there's a bunch of cloying smells in here, so that doesn't work. Or the sound's really loud, or you're deafened, so that doesn't work very well. Or, any sort of like flickering lights, and be like, all right, well, your visibility's all shot because your eyes are freaking out because of photons. You're really having a difficult time seeing things. Things like that. So kind of anytime that you want to mess with their senses, since touch is a little bit more difficult to do, I guess you could hit them with some sort of like numbing cloud, which would be interesting. Like maybe if they saved against a paralysis thing, they would still have numbing effects on it, and that they have the numbing effects, maybe they have, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a reason why that would be useful in combat. Maybe if it was like sturges or something like that, some sort of creature that attaches to you, just like mosquitoes do. Mosquitoes, when they bite you, they have a little paralytic agent that they send into you, so you don't feel the pain very much. That's why you get them and then they itch like crazy later. And so they don't itch like crazy when you're doing it, when they're actually sucking your blood. It's afterwards, because they use that little paralytic agent. So doing things like that, and lots of things do that. I think the leeches have a very similar mechanism as to how they work as well. So doing things like that, if you wanted to give them some sort of like a light decay or something like that, which would be really weird, being able to be like trying to do things. Oh man, that would totally screw up like somatic components. Like you can't really. No, it's like having dead fingers, like your arms asleep, and be like, I can't do magic. I can't swing a sword very well. Note to self: add that to an encounter. I don't know how I would add that to an encounter, but man, that'd be fun. It feels like it should be an ooze encounter. That's what I'm gonna say. Is that it feels like that should be some sort of weird. That'd be a great effect for. Maybe a big ooze BBEG in a layer. That'd be fun. But they have this this effect that you have to keep saving against, and unlike everything else in 5e24, where it's like, oh, once you pass the save, you don't have to worry about it for the next 24 hours, which I personally don't find is super great design. I'm like, just make the DC lower, man. Yeah, it sucks if they don't make it, but it sucks being stunned too, and stun's still in the game, so I don't really see the difference. Just make it a low DC. And they have to make it all the time. And that's pretty much most of the conditions as far as combat goes. Like, already you can see there's so much stuff that we can just kind of jam pack into an encounter. Now the thing is that you don't want to try to do all this stuff at the same time. You don't want to screw with the air and then also screw with water and add impassable terrain and add elevation and make sure that there's a bunch of pillars and cover and all sorts of obscurement, and there's fog, and you don't want to add all that stuff. Just like, we'll go back to the food metaphor, just like with a urban spice blend, it's like you can't just put the entire spice rack in there. It's not going to taste good. You have to pick and choose things that work well together, flavor profiles, if you will. So if we wanted to build something that was like, all right, choose like 2 or 3, maybe. Even 1 is really powerful, but 2 or 3, if you want to make them less powerful, the more you add, the less powerful they need to be. So let's say that they're going through a cave, they're fighting, I don't know, when are we going to fight? What's a good monster? Good cave monster. Carrion crawlers. I feel like I never do carrion crawlers. So there's some carrion crawlers in here they need to get through. What's some good things that we could hide from them? Carrion crawlers are pretty big. I think they're pretty slow too, actually. Look, carrion crawlers. Carrion crawlers. Because I like them because they have their paralytic thing. I don't get to use them very often. No, get out of here. Here, I can actually just... how about that? That'll be a little bit easier. Change this back over. Let this open. There we go. Carrion crawler. Nice low level monster. CR2. It's got spider climb. Great. All right, so we know it's got spider climb. So this is one of the things that we talk about consistently, is that you want to do synergies. All right, so we definitely want something with walls. We definitely want to put them in some arena where they can make use of that. Get around. And their paralyzing thing, target is poison condition and repeats the saving throw. While poison the target, it has the paralyzed condition, which is real bad, by the way. Especially for a CR2 monster. Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that. Being a dexterity, it's not a dexterity saving throw. Maybe this was an errata condition. They probably put this probably been errated. So it probably was originally put in as a dexterity saving throw, but yes, it's poison condition. Poison stuff is almost always constitution. Uses paralyzing tentacles and makes 1 bite. Okay, yeah. So these are really bad to fight against as lower level party. Being paralyzed is a really bad condition. Yeah, so we want to make sure that we throw this guy in an area where he's got some walls or something he can climb on, which has got to be something that's probably, if you just put carrion crawlers on the wall, it's like, great, that stopped the paladin from getting to it, but everybody else probably has a ranged option. To just shoot this thing, and this thing has to be in melee range to do stuff. So you're going to want to put some sort of way for it to get around things. So pillars are really good. Throw some pillars in the room. They can kind of circle around and get cover from other creatures and then zip around. Maybe some ruined walls. There's like breaks and gaps and stuff in this like ruined chamber. That makes it very easy for it to hide. We also want it to not get absolutely obliterated by ranged combat, so I'd be like, what's a good thing to stop ranged combat? We're going to put some light fog in here. We're going to put some... Actually, we'd have to make it heavy because of the way that light obscurement works. It's just disadvantage on perception checks, not attacks. So it'd have to be a dense fog or something. Now, we got it. All right, so we got some walls for them to climb around on so they can get up off the ground. We got this dense fog that makes it hard to go through. So maybe this thing where they can like hear the scuttering of this one or more carrion crawlers, these creatures in here, but they can't get eyes on them. They know they're in here with him because they're in the goddamn walls. Yeah, they're just crawling over the walls. They're not in them. And then we might be like, okay, let's add one more thing, so that we've already really increased the difficulty of this. They have dark vision. They don't have tremor sense or blind sight or true sight or anything like that. So they are also, if we give them any sort of heavy obscurement, let's look at that too. We also don't necessarily have to give them heavy obscurement. We could just put them in an absolutely black. If we said it was a cave chamber, so if it doesn't have any light from the surface, there's no ambient light in here. I play is that because this is one of those weird things where D&D and the real life doesn't really add up together, is that if you play full raw as rules as written, is that players with dark vision can see in the dark. That includes things like most monsters. Tons of monsters have dark vision. Tons of player characters have dark vision. It also has dark vision cats. Cats, because they're a real world animal, we know that they can't see in absolute darkness because we have to have some sort of photon exchange. There has to be some sort of ambient light for us to be able to see something. So if we put them in a room that there's no ambient light in, like we said this was a cave, it's probably underground. Unless the entrance is somewhere close, there's not going to be any ambient light in here until the player characters light up a torch, probably. These creatures are just going around blind in the dark, these carrion crawlers. That's okay for them. They eat dead things. Things that they eat don't typically run. Now, they like to make carrion that they can eat, obviously, because they're a very predatory monster. But they also just eat dead things, so they can futz around in a dark room without too much issue. Especially because they can climb and stuff. Like they're easy to get around with. So being in total darkness is not, being in heavy obscurement is not super an issue for them. The thing that would be nice is if they had some sort of like keen senses or something that would give them a better ability to track things down. But player characters will probably be making a bunch of noise because somebody's almost undoubtedly in medium or heavy armor, so they're going to be clanking around. They're pretty easy to track down. And in addition to that, they're probably going to have a light source on them. Now, it could be in heavy obscurement. If we just said it was absolute darkness, well, suddenly having any amount of light in there makes you a giant beacon for anything. And these things can zip around their way, and then they have their dark vision. Their dark vision will work as normal. Now they can see in there as if the entire place was lit up with torchlight, essentially. So that's how you get around that. So we've got some light in there. We've got some obscurement in there. Whether we wanted darkness or heavy fog or something. We're gonna give them some ruins to climb over, some ways to like break line of sight. So the mage can't just hit them with fire bolts from 50 feet away without any problems. We're gonna put some walls in their way so they can zigzag back and forth. They can lose sight of their allies, which is also a very important thing. As far as like going around and healing them, which makes them easier to separate, which is what these creatures are going to want to do. They're going to want to try to separate somebody, hit them with the paralytic touch, give them little nibbles, and try to just eat them, probably. So this is definitely the sort of creature, if you really want to be this guy, which sometimes you are, I do tell my player characters is like, hey, sometimes you have to understand what the monster's goals are. Sometimes the monster's goal, like something like a carrion crawler, is to make carrion and then eat that carrion. So if it can get somebody aside, hit it with the paralytic, get them down, it's just going to start munching on them, which they're going to have advantage on those attacks and all that stuff because they're prone and paralysis. And then once you hit 0 hit points, they're going to keep eating you because they want to eat you. That's their whole thing. They're hungry boys. So that's what they're going to do. So there's a great example of just like doing that stuff. Really quickly, if you want to see how to add the conditions, you can make a new combat like that. Went from, if you just threw the carrion crawlers in a room with a party, that's not a very interesting fight. Yeah, sure, it's going to get a paralytic touch off them. 1, maybe 2 guys. But it's also going to get locked down easy. Everybody's going to be able to hit it with ranged attacks and stay away from it. The people who want to stay away from it will be able to stay away from it. And the people with those good constitution saving throws are going to be up front anyways, which means they're probably not going to fail a lot of DC 12 constitution saving throws for CR2 because they're probably 2nd or 3rd level. If they're fighting multiple ones too, it might even be 4th level. They're not going to fail a lot of DC 12 constitution saving throws, especially those guys up front, because they're going to have a positive con modifier, and they're going to have probably proficiency on constitution. So you know that they're coming out the gate probably with at least a +4. It's low level, so there's a high likelihood the cleric's going to throw a bless down on them, so they're going to have an extra d4. So now you're talking about an extra like 6.5 to the roll, which means they now only need to roll like a 5, between a 5 and a 6, which means they're gonna succeed 75% of the time, about. And that's how you use the math. And that's not everybody's cup of tea, but that is my cup of tea. So I look at that and go, they'll make about 75% of those changes. So I definitely want to get. That means that once every 4 rounds, which means the combat's usually about 3 to 4 rounds, which means they may not paralytic anybody unless I can get to one of those juicy backline guys who don't have good con scores and definitely don't have proficiency. I can nibble on them a little bit, and they're going to be real easy to hit because they're not going to have heavy armor at these low levels kind of stuff. And now we're talking about tactics. Those are tactics for your characters, or for your monsters. They know what they want to do. They want to be successful. How do they be successful? And that goes into the next thing. We're talking about goals and motivations. That's one of the ways to make combat more deadly than anything else. So, why is everyone in the encounter after blood? And we can just keep using this carrion crawler example, because I think it's going to be a pretty decent example. Is the goal for everybody on each side to kill everybody else? Should it be something else? We talked about the tightrope thing where it's like, oh, you need to stop the bad guy from getting from point A to point B, or something bad happens. Maybe they know what it is, maybe they don't know what it is, they just know that it will be bad for them, and you have to make it very clear. There's like, if you allow this bad guy to do this monster to do the thing they're trying to do, it will be bad for you. You should probably stop them. Just make sure that there are clear goals, clear stakes, so they know, hey, we need to stop this guy. And so most often the goal for the PCs and NPCs shouldn't be just stab the other guy until they're dead. We talked about that duel example from the book, and why that's sometimes such a poor example, because that's kind of the default for a D&D combat, and it's just not very good. It's just really bland, right? It's a blank room, 2 men enter, 1 man leave, Thunderdome rules, and that's really boring. So even Thunderdome, in that example, they put different weapons on the cage of the dome. Already makes it a more interesting fight than what D&D has given us with those dual style of fights, where it's just like, you guys enter, there's bad guys over there, nobody leaves until one of you guys dies. It's interesting. Like, the closest comparison I have probably would be something like, I mean, it's like a video game boss fight for the most part, but most video game boss fights generally have other stuff going on. The only exceptions that I can think of are, well, not the only, but the ones that come to mind are the Legend of Zelda, like, mini boss fights. Like, not the full boss fights, but like, generally, sometimes there's in a dungeon, there's a mini boss fight in the middle of it. I'm thinking like, I'm trying to think, I think Skyward Sword has them. I know Twilight Princess and definitely Ocarina of Time have them. I think Skyward Sword has them as well, too. Yeah, they've got them. I'm pretty sure. Where it's just like, oh, you walk into a room, doors close, bars come down over the doors, there's a bad guy in here, can't leave until you kill the bad guy. And that is about as interesting as the fight is. They're nice because they're a combat challenge in the context of Zelda, where often in those games, most of the game has a bunch of other stuff going on. You've got platforming and puzzle solving and all these other things and abilities and tools that you're trying to use. There's a lot of exploration challenges that also have some combat mixed into them, but there's very few just like combat only. We're not talking like a boss monster that has a gimmick. It's just, you just got to hit this guy enough times for him to go down. And it's only interesting in high tension because generally they're a pretty aggressive monster that's attacking you, and you got to get through them. And it's only interesting because it's in contrast to everything else that kind of goes on in those games. In D&D, then there's not that contrast. Generally, you walk into a room and you kill the guy every time. So think about what is everybody actually trying to do in this room? Are they trying to get to a destination? Are they trying to raise an alarm or a warning? You need to subdue this person? Is there a reason? Really, really great dungeon you can run where everybody in there, like an aboleth or something like that, where they've taken over a village. You're like, you actually don't want to kill the villagers. You need to subdue them or detain them in some way, or have something that's going to, whether a spell or a consumable item or something like that, that will break the mind control on them, etc. And so you're actually trying not to kill them. That already makes things very different. D&D is a little different because subdual damage is just kind of a thing that you say when you hit somebody 0 and be like, oh, I'm just trying to knock them out and not trying to kill them. So that's not as interesting in D&D as it is in other systems where you have like pull punch mechanics, where you actually do less damage, so it makes the combat more dangerous for you because you can't take them out. There's also things like, hey, do you want to try to bribe these people so they will just get out of your way? You can do stuff like that. Do some sort of quid pro quo. A lot of old modules, OSR style modules, have a lot of that where monsters always generally, I'm thinking of Keep on the Borderlands, where all the monsters that are in the Caves of Chaos. Caves of Chaos, right? Caves of Chaos. Alliteration. Not Caves of Madness, it's the redo. Caves of Chaos. Where there's already, these factions already have this interconnected web of how they deal with each other, pre-existing relationships with other monsters in the area. So you can do a quid pro quo. It's like, hey, if you help us, you go up to the goblins like, hey, if you help us with the orcs, you know, we'll give you part of a map to the caves, or we'll introduce you to, I think there's an ogre in there, or ogres. We'll introduce you to the ogres who we kind of have good relations with, and you can do stuff like that. You want to stop them from finishing the ritual, which is not about killing them, it's about stopping them. You want to either raise the drawbridge or stop the bad guys from raising the drawbridge because you want to get inside, or you're trying to get somebody else inside, or you have NPCs with you or something like that. So there's lots of things to think about the goals and motivations of who's walking into a potential combat scenario. And when that happens, what are they trying to get out of it? Because a lot of them, especially early on in the dungeon, like a location adventure kind of things, is going to be alarm or warning. You come across bad guys, the first people you're going to come across are generally like the guards on the outside, the perimeter guards. And their entire job is to alarm people when a threat shows up. So anytime that you get an encounter with these people, first, generally you want to sneak past them. At least that's my sensibility. That's, I guess, some of my own OSR style tendencies. The like, first thing I want to do is not mess with these guys, not get in as many fights as I can. So we're gonna try to get past this guy, or we're gonna do the old Assassin's Creed special, and we're gonna throw a rock over there, wait for one of the guys to peel off to go investigate. We'll stab that guy, and then get his partner silently too, and pull them out, or we're gonna stand them up, their dead bodies up, as if they were still around, so nobody thinks anything's gone wrong, and then we sneak our way in. But that's not everybody's style of play. A lot of group style of play is like, oh, there's two guys up there. We immediately pop out and murder them. We try to ambush them, and then we just murder them. And generally, most dungeon masters will run them and be like, okay, well, they fight. Especially a new dungeon master would be like, okay, there are two guards. I'm thinking about like the Cragmont hideout in the very first Sandelver. So you have the initial encounter with the goblins, and then assuming you would survive as a level 1 party, you follow them back to the Cragmont hideout, and I think there's two guys outside of it, goblins outside of it, and who are like posted sentries. You're like, okay, generally how that ends up playing is like the player characters hop out of the bushes, they attack them, and the guards fight them to the death, and with a new dungeon master, and that's the end of the encounter, and they move further, and they actually move into the caves. But how that would really probably go, especially with an experienced dungeon master, would be like, you guys pop out, you take one of them down, but you don't take the second one down. The second one actually gets their turn. On their turn, they immediately turn around and dash back in, screaming their head off about intruders in Goblin. And if you have somebody who speaks Goblin, you know what they're saying. If you don't know what they're saying, you know that they're screaming. You can probably guess that they're screaming intruders, intruders, alarm, alarm, alert, alert. You know, two arms, two arms. So you don't necessarily have to speak it, but it helps if you can. You know exactly what they're saying. So just changing that from your monster side about being like, what are they trying to do? Sometimes the monsters also aren't trying to kill you. Monsters like goblins, hobgoblins, any sort of creatures that basically have a language will know, especially if they're in a location that's close to Lake Phandelver, where they're like, oh, Phandelin's pretty close. Like, if we bring people who are here, we're actually trying to capture you so that way we can ransom you back for money. Because if you die, you're just a dead body, but if we keep you alive and capture you, we get your gear, which, I mean, we get if you're dead too. We'll get your gear, but also we can try to ransom you back to friends and family for filthy, filthy money. which they want for, you know, the reasons everybody wants money. Buy more mead and to buy, you know, supplies, weapons, armor, information, etc., etc., etc. I stopped them from finishing the ritual, stuff like that. Tactics and monster synergy. Let's talk about that real quick. So as DM, you're often placing a 4-on-1 or worse odds when you're in a fight and you're running a combat encounter. You're like, I've got 1 brain. Presumably, I have 4 brains, 4 players, and they have 4 brains. Occasionally, maybe they have 2 brains. You know, each of them gets like half a brain. I mean, we've all dealt with players. Sometimes it feels like they're only operating with about half a brain. Sometimes it's just how it goes. But even if each of them only has half a brain, that's still a 2-to-1 odds. So you're at a brain power disadvantage when you are running D&D in general. So planning some tactics or synergy with monsters beforehand in that prep area will help you a lot. And you just write down some notes, just like I did with the carrion crawler. Okay, the carrion crawler is going to be in the darkness. Perfect. Carrion crawler doesn't care about being in the darkness. I don't know exactly where they're going to be in the room. Maybe I'll roll for it. Maybe I'll just pick some place that they're at in the room. I've given them some walls to start behind, so they're probably not out there. We're going to throw some, either the darkness or the heavy fog that's in there, or whatever it is. What I might do is I might make it a poisonous fog. If I was really nasty, I'd make it a poisonous fog because they're immune to poison, so I don't have to worry about that, right? And I think they're immune to poison. Most things that do poison are immune to poison. Perception, dark vision, language. Maybe they're not. Alright, that's weird. Almost every monster that does some sort of poison damage is immune to poison. That seems not right to me. Is that truly how that is? I'm gonna look at a different stat block from a different place just to see. Oh, this different stat block says they have keen smell. In addition to Spider Climb. Did this one have keen smell? This one didn't have a keen smell. I wonder if I'm looking at the difference between the 2024 one and the 2014 one. It'd be interesting if they took keen smell away from it for some reason. Everything else looks pretty much the same. Oh yeah, huh? Yeah, 2024. Oh, the carrion crawler got a nerf in 2024. That's why. I'm looking at the 2014 one, and they're much nastier. So instead of its 1 tentacle and 1 bite, instead the 2014 version gets 2 tentacle attacks and 1 bite. The difference is that one's just a save. The new one is just a save for the Constitution saving throw. The second, the 2014 one, they make attacks, so it's going to make 3 attacks. And if it hits with an attack, then you make the Constitution saving throw. And the Constitution saving throw is higher. It's DC 13. Or poison for 1 minute. And this one has save at each end of each of its turns. Until the poison ends, the target is paralyzed. Yeah, all the same. Yeah, no, it is different, huh? Wow. Interesting. Wonder why this creature got the nerf. I don't feel like... Maybe it's just because I don't use carrion crawlers that often. Which sucks, because I like them as a monster. They're a fun monster. A fun, old-school D&D style monster. It's just a weird, big bug thing that eats dead people. And so it's really easy to throw in dungeons as to why it's there. Alright, well, anyways. So yeah, you want to look at synergy. So, obviously, I would have assumed that they would have immunity to poison because they deal poison damage, because that's usually how that works. Like spiders. Oh well. So you want to plan some tactics and synergy. So what does that mean? So your monsters know that their own allies' powers the same way that the PCs know generally what everybody in the party can kind of do from their side. they're going to use similar tactics related to themselves and their allies and their environment. They're going to know that if they knock things prone, if you have a monster that can knock things prone, like a dogs or wolves or stuff like that, you want to do that so your allies can get advantage. So if you want allies that do things like, if I wanted to match the carrion crawler, I would probably, maybe I'd throw like carrion crawler, like one big carrion crawler, and then reskin some like wolves or dogs as like baby carrion crawlers. And so they don't do the paralytic thing, but they knock things prone. When they knock things prone, well, that would be if I was using the 2014 edition, because then they would make the attack. Not as useful for the 2024 one, because you don't have to make an attack. The Constitution saving throw just happens. I kind of like it better if they do the attack. Okay. So very interesting. So in the 2024 version, they rolled the poison damage into the bite attack, whereas in the 2014 version, the poison damage is not from the bite, it's from the tentacle attack. Interesting. And actually does less damage. But the bite does more damage, I think. No, the bite does the same amount of damage. 4 plus 2. D4 plus 2. But the poison does less damage. So here it's 1d4 plus 2. And here it's 1d6. No, technically 1d4 plus 2 is more. So yeah, they really just kind of nerfed it. Interesting. It's not a huge nerf. It's just an interesting one. Like taking away keen smell is such a weird one. Anyways, getting really sidetracked on that. And I feel like I haven't seen that many monsters between 2024 and 2014 that have such a big change. It's just interesting the changes they were made. I just don't feel like I heard a lot of bad press about how carrion crawlers were really difficult. I think they're supposed to be difficult. They're one of those OG D&D monsters. They're supposed to be terrifying. It's like Fireball. It does more damage than any other spell if it's leveled because it's Fireball. Carrion crawler, because carrion crawler. But yeah, they will use things. So like I said, I would get like the baby ones that allow it to try to knock it prone, knock player characters prone on their turn. So that way the big mama carrion crawler or whatever has more likely gets advantage on those attacks with its tentacles to paralyze people. And now you're paralyzed and prone, then these things are going to eat you. And now that fight is a lot more difficult than if it had just been, a carrion crawler and everybody could stand up and just run away from it. Also means that you can't get away from it. So if you run up on the wizard, knock the wizard prone, a low level wizard prone, which is going to be pretty easy. They're not going to make a lot of strength saving throws. And the big carrion crawler comes over and hits them with the tentacles, and they're paralyzed, and your wizard's going to be in a bad spot. Any of your spellcasters are going to be in a bad spot if that happens. Because they got to save from the paralyze. They're already going to be out for at least a round. They got to save from the paralyze. Then they've got to get up with half their speed and then crawl in half their speed running away. But if they do that, they're going to provoke unless they have like a misty step or something. Then you're getting them to use their resources in combat, which is what you want as the DM. So you don't have to make a bunch of difficult encounters if you just make a lot of smaller encounters in which they need to use their things. Other things I would say, monsters that knock things prone, so allies can get advantage on, is a really good one. Forcing PCs to fight in the water, where creatures with swim speeds don't take negatives to their combat abilities. Yeah, like fighting Swaggin in the water is real bad time for most player characters. It's definitely, you want to put the fear of God in some players really quickly, is put them on a boat in the water and just have Swaggin just come up over the gunwales and grab them and just pull them overboard into the water and fight them underwater. Your players are going to have their player characters are going to have a real bad time, and they're going to be real scared of the water in the future. Especially anybody in heavy armor who's immediately going to start sinking. And plus dealing with breath and all that stuff. So yeah, those are all really easy ways to make combat more deadly. In addition to that, you can do lingering injuries, which is a house rule that I use, which is essentially a stop. One of the things that really takes the teeth out of combat in 5e24 is the ability for player characters to basically go down to 0, get hit with that first level healing word, get a handful of hit points back, they pop up, they take their turn, they get knocked over again, you get another healing word, they pop up, and it's this pop up, pop down, pop up, attack, pop down, pop up, attack, which is a very common cycle in 5e24 style play, where it's just like, oh, we don't really need to heal anybody, we just need to heal them enough to where they can get their turn. And so the lingering injuries house rule that I use is like, if you get KO'd during the combat, there's going to be some sort of lingering injury that comes off of that. Most of the time, I have around like I was going to pull it out. I have one of those nice specialty D12s, which is a hit location die, which just has a what is it, the Vitruvian Man just out, or essentially somebody T-posing, and it just tells you where on their body they get hit. And then I'm like, okay, you got knocked out. We know the attack that did this to you. Now we're going to roll this die, and whatever this die is, you're going to have some sort of lingering injury off of it. And let's say that you got, let's say you're fighting the carrion crawler, and no, let's say that one of the baby carrion crawlers jumps up, knocks the sorcerer prone. In that attack, they fail their saving throw, they fall down. Doesn't really matter because they hit 0 hit points. Great, we're gonna roll a hit location die. Okay, we rolled head. Yeah, you cracked your head on the stone as you fell down, and you are definitely concussed. You full on have disadvantage on any sort of mental stats, any sort of mental ability checks. That would probably, if I was being kind, I'd be like, it's just ability checks. If I was unkind, I'd be any sort of ability checks, saves, or attacks. So that would be any sort of magic, which would be really unkind to our sorcerer, so I probably wouldn't go that far. I'd probably just start with ability checks. Now, if they get knocked out again, and they get their head hit again, now they got bigger problems. I'm probably going to be like, you've got your skulls cracked open. And I don't know, I might take some hit dice away from you and be like, hey, you permanently lose these hit dice for a while. And then for me, I use that resource die mechanic for lingering injuries. It's like you start off with a d6. Every session, you roll a d6. If you roll a 1, then it goes down to a d4. Every session, you roll that d4. If you roll a 1 at the start of the session, it goes down to 1, which means you have one more session of whatever this condition is, this lingering injury is. Once you go through that last session, be like, this thing is healed. Because unfortunately, it's just not like we had a character in the campaign I'm currently running who broke their leg for a while, and they were slowed, and they had disadvantage on dexterity saving throws, I believe. Just because, hard to get out of the way when you got a broken leg. So that was the case, and it's not super realistic because, yeah, if you had broken like your femur, you're not doing anything for weeks. But that's not fun to model in D&D. That's not fun to be like, okay, everybody needs to take a month of downtime while our artificer sits in traction, waiting for their leg to heal, and then has to do PT as they get their strength back up. It's like, that stuff's not fun to model. Just be like, hey, this thing happened to you. It's really bad. It's going to be a big pain in the butt. We don't know for how long. And it ran for many, many sessions. Now, there were things they did do, like, hey, if you get medical care for it, that gives you essentially advantage, which in this case is disadvantage, at the first session roll. Next time when you're like, okay, you're going to roll 2d6, and you're going to take whichever one's the lowest, which gives you an extra chance to roll a 1, which means if you have, finite medical attention to it, there's a chance that you're going to heal faster. Not guaranteed, it just gives you the opportunity to heal faster. It also gives them a way to get some gold out of their pockets. Like, you need to pay for somebody to take care of you. And they had like medicine and other sorts of things that they had with them to help with it. And yeah, that's it for lingering house rules. So D&D as a resource management game. So I talked about earlier is like making that wizard or sorcerer, whoever it is, use their Misty Step to get away from a creature rather than just trying to lose their turn disengaging because they can't make it far enough away. Whereas they can Misty Step and then run. Gives you, anytime that you put your players in a position in combat where they have to use their finite abilities, those spell slots, you can use it this many proficiency number of times per day or per short rest. Anytime you're getting them to use that stuff, then the combat's doing what it's supposed to do, which is winnowing down their resources. You want to cut away at their resources. Is despite everything, and I know we've talked about this before on the channel, but despite everything that we want to talk about, how D&D is collaborative storytelling, and it is this thing where we're telling these fantastic stories and plots and everything. At the end of the day, it is still a game, and that game is a resource management game. You have a character sheet in front of you who has a certain number of things that they can do. Most of those things are a certain number of times they can do it per day or per rest. That's a resource, and you're managing it as you're trying to achieve a goal. That's a resource management game. And so when you start thinking about D&D mechanically as a resource management game, it will change how you approach things like combat. And the older editions, where that OSR style didn't have this collaborative storytelling. Storytelling was part of it, but the storytelling was like... The way that I like to frame this is that D&D, as it's pitched, is a role-playing game. Game is the proper thing it is. Role-playing is the type of game it is. Whereas today, I would say D&D is more gamified role-playing. Role-playing seems to be where the emphasis is now. We roll the dice to, add the chaos factor to it. So it is the gamification of that role-playing to inject that chaos into it, that uncertainty, that risk-reward aspect of it. And so it's slightly different. So if you look at OSR stuff, it's like, well, yeah, it's very much a game. You know what you're trying to do. You're trying to get XP. You're trying to level up. You're trying to get these things accomplished for your character. And it is very much a resource management game where you're like, okay, we have to get in there, see how far we can get in the dungeon. We can still be able to have enough resources to get back out of the dungeon, get all our filthy lucre back to town safely, so that way we can exchange it for XP, which will allow us to level up. That's the game. That's the old school style of game. And so when you think about that and you think about how that changes combat, obviously combats don't happen a lot in OSR games because you actually don't want combat. You don't get anything out of combat. Monsters don't give you XP. Gold gives you XP. You want the gold. You see that difference in 5e24 or contemporary D&D, where one of the only things that does have XP amounts, like really just prescriptive XP amounts in the game, are monsters. Almost nothing else does. Sure, some hazards and traps do, but mostly it's monsters. So it's not surprising that D&D in a lot of aspects becomes a fighting game. It's about killing monsters, because that's how you get the XP and that's how you get the levels. That's how you get the power. So it's a change in the style of game. So the game styles are very different in the OSR game and the contemporary game. And now if you switch into this newer thing, so it was like, okay, gold was XP, then it became monsters was XP, and now I think almost everybody, certainly from my own experience, almost everybody now runs essentially milestone or basically Dungeon Master Fiat leveling up. Like, we're like, we don't use the experience system because it's kind of silly, because then you're just focused on killing monsters. Yep. But it's also not focused on you getting gold, because I just don't want you to be terrible people who just like loot the dead and do stuff like that. Yeah. So, but there's also no framework for how to give you experience based off of role play. So it's hard to get a game to run a game when there's no clear way for the style of game that you're wanting to play, that gamified role play, where there's no rubric, there's no method for getting experience from just doing the role playing as the primary means of getting experience and leveling up. So it's weird. So that's all to say, is to set you up for this idea, is that one of the mistakes that you'll often see, especially with super new dungeon masters, and be like, oh, my players are really just steamrolling over my combat encounters. What do? Well, obviously I got to make harder combats. And it's like, no, that's one of those failed premises. Is like, yes, obviously, first thought, yes, obviously you just make harder fights. If I make bigger, badder fights, then they're going to be challenged by the fight. And then this is I call this the shonen problem. It becomes the shonen problem, which is that just power scale becomes your problem. You're like, okay, if you have a group that is just running over your combats, and then you're like, all right, well, I'll start making more powerful combats. And then the players are like, oh man, this combat started to get more powerful. Well, I've got to make sure that now, whenever I make a player character choice, a choice for my player character, I make a combat-oriented one. Now we become more powerful. And then in response, you make more powerful like counters, and then it just becomes this ladder of escalation. That's a very shonen, like manga anime style thing, where it's just like, oh, and everybody just gets more powerful because we don't know how to deal with it, don't know how to constrain that. Very much like a Dragon Ball Z kind of thing, where it's just like, oh, Saiyan, we just have to keep inventing new Saiyan levels and more powerful things, even though even low-level people can blow up planets comparatively over the arc of the Dragon Ball series. You're like a low-level person in the great hierarchy of power in Dragon Ball comics, manga, and anime, is that the first person who does that, I think, is Frieza. And I mean, like, Frieza's a nobody as to where Dragon Ball is now. Frieza's nobody. He's so low on the power scale. I mean, like, but that guy could already blow up a planet. Like, that's not good. It's not good. It's a problem. So, rather than creating more fights, bigger, badder fights that are going to take more time at the table, you're going to get even more and more burned out on it. The secret is actually to make lots of smaller, more frequent fights. You push them towards, which is going to push you towards that recommended number of encounters that you should have per session, which is, even though they brought that down in 2024, it used to be what, like 7 or 8, now it's like 3 to 4, which is a bit more manageable. Makes sense. An encounter takes about 45 minutes of time at the table, so assuming you have a normal place session, you're going to get about 4 in most of the time. Plus, you know, how much of the time that your players spend screwing around, which can be a lot sometimes. But if you make smaller, more frequent fights, they're still going to do the same things. It's instead of focusing on doing one big death blow encounter, instead being like, we're going to do cuts. Because this is the difference between how you think about monsters and how you think about player characters. Player characters got to make it through the day. Every single day. They got to stay alive that whole day, every day, all the way through the dungeon, all the way to the dungeon, all the way back from the dungeon. They got to stay alive once they're in town. Everything could be trying to kill them. Don't have everything try to kill them. But they need to persist throughout the entire campaign for the campaign to happen. Monsters. Primarily, these guys they show up in one scene. And they're expected to die. They are expendable. They're very, very expendable. So, these guys are expendable, which is great, because as a dungeon master, I have as many as I want. I have a whole armful of them. You get monsters, and you get monsters, and you get monsters, and you get monsters. And I can just put them out in whatever, because these guys don't have to live beyond an encounter. I don't care if they run away. I don't care if they die. I don't care about anything. They are the obstacle. They are the things. They are the pressure. They are the hazard of dealing with this place, dealing with the adventure. So maybe the best way to do this is let me discuss this in a way as to what's a good way to do this. Let's do, you know what? We'll go to Kobold Press. Right, not Kobold Press. Kobold Fight Club. And pull this up. What level characters are we? I'm just gonna roll a die. One moment. Because this will be a good interpretation of this. Alright, they're 5th level. Perfect. They're 5th level. Here, here we go. Alright, so we've got 4 players, 5th level. We're gonna make, let's just pick a random thing. Those guys are pretty high. Let's, I feel like I did the Aarakocra stuff last time. I'm gonna pick something low, because it'll help prove my point, I feel like. What is the recommended thing for a 5th level group? I mean, it's like, what, yeah, so they gotta be higher than CR3. They gotta be, what, CR4? CR5. It's definitely not CR5. Alright. Hey, sure. Let's go with, we're going to use this Allosaurus. One Allosaurus, trivial. Now, this is the 2024 update math, which is super wonky. I'll show you why. So generally, it used to be, in 2024, that I would always just make high-level encounters. And this works really well. If you really want to challenge them, just put them on whatever is basically under deadly. And you'll be fine most of the time. At least if you were using the 2014 math. But this, alright, so 4 level 5 characters should be able to take on 14 Allosauruses. Now, that's going to be a long combat. It's going to be a big pain in the butt. What if instead... Can I have this? No, I can't do that. Let's do it this way. No, I just... Show me by CR. I need some other CR2s. Because I can't use the same thing. Giant elk. Sure. And ringmouther. Why not? Alright, so instead of having 14 monsters in one combat, what if we split those between combats? What if we did like a little escalation here? So let's do, I mean, if we divided those in 3, that would be, what, 4 per? So let's have 3 here. Let's do 6 here. And went way over 6. It's this. So instead we can make, instead of 1 encounter, we can make 3 encounters. One time you throw, and these are all Allosaurus as far as the example is concerned. First time you fight the Allosaurus here, there's going to be 3 of them. Instead, you have a second encounter with them, where there's 5 of them. And then the third encounter of them, where there's 6 of them. Now, we did an escalation, but you could move those all over the place. Almost more importantly is that these aren't fully balanced with each other. So sometimes they're a little bit harder than the others. We could even dump this down and drop this up. And that'd be pretty tough. And we could even go down. 2's not very many. We generally don't want to use less than half. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in unbalanced encounters. But we do this. So this will actually probably be more interesting if you had 3 smaller encounters with these 3 different groups of creatures rather than 14 Allosaurus attacks. You're like, oh, well, there was some... As we were traveling through the, this jungle-ish area, we had a fight with we got ambushed by these 3 Allosaurus. Light combat, stuff like that, and it wasn't too bad. We knocked them out pretty easily. They're 3 CR2s, so they probably did some damage to somebody. Not a ton, whatever. But what happens at the end of the combat? Do they decide to take a short rest or not? If they take a short rest, they maybe spend a healing spell. They don't want to take a short rest, or maybe in addition to that, they spend a healing spell. Somebody throws out a cure wounds. You take a short rest, and somebody does one of the things like one of the rest abilities that they can only do number of proficiencies per day. You get them to spend resources. And then another encounter happens, this time with a giant elk, that maybe they're moving up into a highland area, so more deciduous, lightly spread out, a little bit more plains, maybe in like a plateau kind of area. And there's this giant elk. They get attacked by a herd of giant elk. There's 4 of them. Again, a little bit more difficult. Not super more difficult, but a little bit more difficult. What happens? Into combat. We're going to take maybe another short rest. We're going to do some more healing. We'll probably use a few other abilities in that. Think about, the way I like to look at this is like, what is the difference between this encounter if it was one big encounter? And let's say you had a ranger with Hunter's Mark. They cast Hunter's Mark or Hex or something. The Warlock casts Hex, etc. Those are like once per encounter spells that you throw up. So if you did this all as one counter, they only use that effect once. If you split this into 3 encounters, guess what? They're going to use probably that in all 3 encounters. Maybe in 2 of the 3. Maybe they're going to use it everyone. They might see the 3 Allosaurus and be like, it seems like kind of a weenie fight. I'm not sure I'm going to waste my Hunter's Mark for this. I'm going to save it because I only have it a few times a day. Which means that they have to make a decision. If they're making a decision about the resource management aspect of the game, then you're doing the game right. Then it's like, oh, then they are making thoughts about what their characters would do. Is this important? Maybe they get halfway into the fight and be like, actually, we missed a whole bunch in that first and second round, so now these guys are kind of eating our lunch, so now I'm going to throw in this, I'm going to throw in the Hunter's Mark so I can do a little bit of extra damage. Maybe I want to throw in the Hex because I want to get some temporary hit points back, or whatever the case may be, depending on how they work. and stuff like that. And then, all right, they take the second, they do another round of resting. Somebody else spends another healing spell. More hit dice are spent. Then you hit them with the gibbering mouther. And there's 7 of those guys. And this is more of a fight. This fight in general is a moderate fight. Like, this is a pretty balanced fight. But it's their 3rd fight. You're going to get through this. What are they going to do after that? They're going to rest. They're going to probably take another short rest. Essentially. They're going to probably maybe use a healing spell or 2. They're probably going to use some of those once per encounter fight things. Maybe somebody throws out a spiritual weapon. People throw out a hex. People throw out a hunter's mark. We're going to see a lot of those spells come out. And guess what? By splitting these up into 3 fights, we had our players, they used a lot more of the resources than they would with 1 fight. And those fights went a lot quicker. You could probably do all 3 of these fights in the time that you did the 1 fight. Because rolling initiative doesn't take that much time. It takes a little bit of time, but it doesn't take that much time. And the fights will go a lot faster. Because, again, we only need to worry about, our monsters only need to live for as long as they're on screen, which is not very long, but the player characters need to live the entire time. So if you put them in effort where they are like, okay, we could continue adventuring, but we're hurt, then they're going into a combat where they're already maybe at like 60% hit points. They get hit again, maybe they're down to 20%. Maybe they go into this last encounter. If they have decided not to like fully heal up, maybe most people are in that like 2/3 to 3/4 hit points thing. This fight's already going to be more difficult with them because they're going to get hit and they're going to be closer down to 0. Somebody might get knocked out, even though it's not a very difficult fight if you have our gibbering mouthers focus fire on some people. All sorts of stuff we can do in that area that will make this more difficult by actually making smaller, more bite-sized combats. I know it's a little counterintuitive, but trust me, it does work. It works very well and makes your life a lot easier when you're like, I don't have to make a whole bunch of like set piece combats all the time and be like, man, every time we do a combat, it's like, you don't want to get into what I would say is maybe like the Dimension 20 problem, where it's like every other session, every 3rd session is a combat session, and that's just like a 2-hour combat, and you're just like, this is just, it's already, at least in my personal experience, is that I find those the least interesting Dimension 20 episodes to watch, for the most part, is to watch the combat episodes as opposed to the stuff where they're doing everything else. Now, there are cool fights. I'm not going to say there aren't cool fights, and the miniatures are freaking cool. There's all that stuff that pumps up the experience. Editing helps a lot. Remember that when you're watching a Dimension 20 episode that's a full combat and it's 2 hours long, that's edited. That means that combat probably took closer to 3 to 4 hours, and they edited stuff out. All the stuff that's in between turns, or all the people like, maybe I do this, maybe I do that, and there's a bunch of table talk and stuff like that. They're easily cutting out probably 50% of it. So we don't want that. You don't want 3-hour combats. You don't want an entire session to be just one big combat. Sure, every once in a while you do a BBG set piece battle. Yeah, you pull it out, you mop it up, you do the whole thing. But you don't want that to be the norm. Normally you want to do these super small, very, very bite-sized little fights where you're just winnowing, you're just cutting away. Little cuts. Like we said, it's death by 1,000 cuts when it comes to player characters. You cut them here, you cut them again. Each cut gets a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper. Now they're deep in the dungeon, and they're like, well, we need to take a long rest. And you're like, well, good luck with that. You let me know. You go break into a military compound and, try to bed down in a bunk somewhere, and you tell me how well that works out for you. The answer's not very well. If you try to take long rests in dungeons, bad things will probably happen to you. And that's the way that I like to run dungeons. Not everybody's the same way, but for me, that's the difference. That's that in-between aspect between the OSR style and the new style, where the new style is like, you kind of assumes that everybody goes into a fight with all their resources all the time, which is, as I think everybody has seen, it doesn't work out super well. It's not very sustainable. And the OSR thing is like, you can't rest in the dungeon. You're probably going to get killed. That's why there's a whole bunch of weird old spells like Rope Trick and stuff like that allow you, Lehman's Tiny Hut, like all that stuff for you to be actually able to get a long rest in a dungeon. That's why you take those spells. Why you do those things. Because otherwise, it's not safe to be in there. So you want to get out of the dungeon every single time. That's why I like that dungeon that's... my sweet spot is about a dungeon that runs about 2 or 3 sessions. Because that's long enough to know everything that's going on. And gets them to the point where there's enough encounters where they're like, we could use a long rest. But the likelihood that we're going to actually get through a long rest here... pretty low. So I'm pushing them. If I'm pushing them, then I'm doing it right. If they're feeling that pinch of that resource management, like things are tough, then things are going well. They should feel like they're being pushed. They should feel like they're being pushed into a corner. And yeah, that was everything that I wanted to say about that. Oh man, this is taking much longer than I thought it would. So yeah, that was Combat is Deadly. We're also supposed to go over Fast and Furious, player ingenuity, and unbalanced encounters. Oh, baby. And I'm gonna be honest, the next section is even longer. So we'll see how this goes. Combat is Deadly was actually a very small section. Alright. Let's see. Do I want to... This might be a good spot right before we jump into the next one. I think I am actually just gonna take a short break. I'm going to refill up on some coffee. Going to take a little bio break. We'll come back and we'll at least get through Fast and Furious combat. Maybe I'll try to... I want to get through this stuff, so maybe I'll try to wrap it up, make it a little bit smoother. Or if you guys really want me to go into that same level of detail, you let me know, and we'll split this up into like 2 different ones. There's just a lot to say about combat and making it deadly, as opposed to how I think a lot of people run 5e24 combats. It's a cornucopia of plenty as to ways to make combat more deadly that are actually really, really easy to add stuff in. But we're going to do Fast and Furious combat. We're going to talk about how to make those combats faster. Obviously, by making those combats smaller. That'll be a part of it. But other things that we do. But I'm going to take that quick break. And I'll be back in just a few minutes. So you guys hold on tight. And I'll be back. Alright? Bye-bye. Alright, I am back. I've done the things that I've needed to do, and I have come back with more glorious bean water to fuel myself. I was just thinking as I was pulling stuff up, is like I just finished there is a Netflix series, it's a Polish series called 1670 that I finished just recently, and it's pretty good. Give it a check out. I was wondering if I should put it on my my appendix N. I was like, probably not, just because of the style of show it is. It's certainly not, by any means, historically really accurate. But it is funny. I'm just not super familiar with Poland's history in general, but especially during that time period, during that 17th century. And so it was very interesting to see that and see their the way they talk things about things. It is a little weird because it does that mockumentary office style show where it's in the 17th century, but they're definitely being followed around by kind of like a film crew. Not overtly like, oh, you see like gaffers in the back or something, like their cameraman standing in the shot or something like that. But it is like they do those asides. I can't remember what they're called. Like the confessional rooms style, where it's like, oh, the character will just turn and start talking directly to the audience, the camera. It's sort of like this interior monologue. It was a bit jarring at first. I got used to it as the show went on, and the show does have some very interesting stuff. There's of course a Witcher joke in there as well in the second season, one of the episodes where they're dealing with witchcraft. But it's a fun show. So if you like that sort of stuff, they have another show a while back called Northman, which was very similar. I think that one may have been Norwegian. I think maybe. Same sort of thing. It's a Viking village, but it is very sort of like tongue-in-cheek modern sensibilities in the Viking Age kind of thing. Very similar kind of thing. But it was an interesting show. So if you're looking for, it's a comedy too. So if you're looking for some, light fun, and you don't mind, and I watched some of it dubbed and some of it's subtitled. I ended up preferring the subtitle after a while because I got annoyed at the lips not matching up with the words that were coming out. So I ended up swapping over the sub version. But either one I think is alright. So give it a check if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Where were we? Oh, that's right. We're going to do Fast and Furious Combat. Okay, so first thing, faster initiative. That is probably the easiest way the simplest way to speed up combat. I know there are lots of people that are like, oh, you roll your attack and damage together, but I've never been a huge fan of that. I don't know if I really have. I'm trying to think of specific reasons. I'm trying to pull up the initiative thing in ICRPG. I did want to show that off since I still had the document up. But I didn't really like that. It was like, oh, this happens, but especially like in the current campaign that I'm playing with, where it's like the damage will change based off of what's happening. And if I'm rolling multiple dice, and sometimes those dice of the same type are for different things, so I really can't roll them all together, because I'll forget which ones are for which. Like, oh right, this one's supposed to be the lightning damage, I think, and this one's the piercing damage, and this one's Hunter's Mark damage, and so trying to keep those things confused. So I don't think it's particularly faster to roll your attack and damage together, because I feel like most of the time when you roll an attack, probably half the time before you don't even need to ask, whether you're gonna not hit or not. You roll a 3 on the die, like probably anything less than maybe a 7 on the die, that you're probably not going to hit whatever it is, depending on the AC. I mean, sometimes you just know from the monsters to be like, oh, it's zombies, I'll probably hit them. And then sometimes you roll high enough on the spectrum, once you start rolling 15 plus on the die, you're like, I'm probably going to hit. I'm going to have enough bonus that I'm probably, anything that gets you 20 plus, you're generally going to hit most things. Unless you're fighting a very specific, big bad guy, in which case you'll probably figure out their AC pretty quickly, has generally been my experience. But yeah, so I think initiative is the easiest way to speed things up. So I was going to share this because we passed over it while I was doing this. And this is the wrong thing. Just my notes that I'm talking off of. do these. All right. So this is how in the RPG does it, where they just, everybody rolls for initiative. Whoever rolls the highest is the first person to go, and then it just goes clockwise around the table. So you just do the roll. Whoever has the highest, you don't need to write anything down. You got the highest, we start from there. As you can see in this diagram shows, it's like, hey, you have an idea about like the optimal order to sit around the table as to who gets to go first and what order, to make sure that like the GM kind of goes last most of the time, kind of things. There's some mechanical optimization as to your seating around the table. Would I encourage doing that? No, but it is there if you want to do it. And this isn't my preferred method to do it, but it is a method. And I used it when we did the Index Card RPG, and it worked out really well, I felt like. It's super fast, for sure. You just roll. Whoever got the highest, okay, you go. And then we just go around the table. Everybody knows when they're going, which is nice. One of the things you don't necessarily always know in D&D combat, unless you have a way to show the initiative order, like you're using table toppers on your screen, or you have a board up that somebody can see. Otherwise, sometimes by the time people realize where they are in combat, combat's probably over. Once they realize, oh, this person's going, that means I'm next. So sometimes it's just easier that way. I've gotten to the point, and this is one of the ones that I like using it, and I go back and forth on it. Sometimes I use standard initiative. A lot of times I use this one, which is a fast and slow rounds, which is something you can pull up from like solo skirmish games, like battlefield skirmish games, where you typically, like, the bad guys kind of always go in the middle, and then depending on how you roll, you determine whether you go before or after the bad guys, depending on your troops. So it's for skirmish games where you roll individually. I'm thinking like 5 parsecs from home. The fancy one is 5 leagues from home, I think. That might be right. Anyways, the idea is like, and that's one of the ways I do it, it's just I take whatever the lead monster is. So in this thing, I saw the Carrion Crawler up. Carrion Crawler gets +1 to initiative, both versions. So they go on, and now they actually have that in there, which I liked as one of the updates they've made. So the same way that a stat block will have basically the take 10 version or the average for their damage, they just do average for initiative now, which I like. I like just having the monsters be like, the Carrion Crawlers always go on 11. If you roll 11 or higher, you go before the Carrion Crawlers. If you roll 10 or less, you go after the Carrion Crawlers. And then instead of figuring out where those people are, let's say that our rogue and our wizard go in before the Carrion Crawler. Great. I don't care which one of you does what. You guys are in the fast round. You guys can strategize. You can work together. I don't care. In fact, I want you to be able to work together in that way. So the primary monster is going to take 10 on their initiative, and then I'm going to do all the monsters at the same time just because it makes life easier. And you roll high. Generally, monsters don't have particularly high initiative, so they're pretty easy to beat most of the time. They kind of sit in that 11 to 13 realm most of the time. Most of the time, unless you're fighting quite nimble creatures, in which case they're really high. So occasionally, everybody might roll in the slow round. But most often times, it's more likely that everybody will be in the fast round. I like them because the PCs who are in whichever round, they get to go in whatever order they like. This very much helps from my aspect as far as the player ingenuity. Like if I want them to be able to coordinate combat maneuvers together and other shenanigans where it's like, okay, I'm going to go, Wizard's going to, I don't know, what's the Wizard going to do? Wizard's going to cast Fairy Fire, so I know that the Fairy Fire can always go off before that rogue goes, so they can always outline the invisible creatures before the rogue gets to attack, so they'll be able to attack the invisible creature, be able to get their sneak attack off. Perfect. Great. Works. Absolutely. Love it. And I'd much rather have that than be like, well, technically the rogue went first, and so they're going to go, and then the wizard's going to cast Fairy Fire, but the rogue already missed because it was an invisible creature and they didn't know where to attack, and now they just kind of wasted their high initiative, and it's not fun. I want them to be, I like the players being able to do combat maneuvers together. Once you normalize kind of the table talk aspect of that, be like, you guys are going at the same time, you guys can coordinate what you want to do. In the same way that me, as the DM, would be like, guess what? The monsters are doing the same thing. They coordinate with each other. That's how I have the carrion crawler, and then the baby carrion crawlers who rush up and then knock you prone, and then the big carrion crawler comes in to devastate you while you're down. So, perfect. As long as everybody's on the same footing about how we can do the stuff, it all works out fine. Now, do I want you to, if you were doing like in-character dialogue, I do want you to keep up with that, like, oh, well, you know, I yell out, well, you can only yell a few words on your turn. That's like a no action, essentially. You only have 6 seconds, so it's whatever you can say in 6 seconds, yelling across the battlefield at somebody else. And those who end up rolling in the slow round are worse because they have to go after the monsters. But they have the same thing where they can coordinate within their group, like anybody else who's in the slow round, as to how they can get some shenanigans, our powers combined kind of stuff working. And in addition to that, they can do setup plans for the fast group that's about to come up. This is really great, where they can do setup stuff for the fast group to take advantage of. Because really, no matter how you splice it, it's basically the monster goes, everybody else goes. So whether they're in, that's split up just from the start of the combat, where it's like fast round, monster, slow round. But that is essentially becomes all the PCs go, then the monster goes. So if you start thinking about it as a circle instead of a line, is that essentially what happens? Is like half the PCs go, the other half go, monster. It's just that becomes the slow round is actually the setup round, which is good because there are a lot of characters that will act in the slow round that are support characters. A lot of your clerics are going to go there. Sometimes your bards will go there. Wizards and sort of people who aren't focused on dexterity. But it also means that there's a lot of fighters and stuff like that. If they're doing paladins, people who are dumping decks or not paying a lot of attention to decks, they're going to roll low generally, which means that the monsters are oftentimes going to get to go, not often, but has a higher chance of going before the player characters do, unless they roll really well. Then it feels really thematic because the fighters or paladins or whoever they are, barbarians, come in and they can lock down monsters whenever they roll high, and if they don't, then the monsters get the jump on some of the other characters first, and then you have your big baddies with their big sticks and boards, and they come in and they have to like basically push the monsters away. So it works out both ways. I like it. I think it works well. It's super fast. You basically don't need to write down. You don't need to take everybody's number. You just need to know whether they're in the fast or slow round and be like, hey, did anybody who rolled 11 or better? You did, you did, you did. Write down your 3 character names. All right, that means you're in the slow round. You're down here. Okay, it's your 3 guys' turn. What are you guys doing? I don't care who goes first. It works out really well. It's a little slow. It's a little cumbersome to start off because you'll have to get players used to doing it. They'll be like, oh, no. But basically how it works in the Sunday campaign, which is the campaign that I play in, where we always run that, it's usually myself playing the ranger with a maxed out deck. So generally myself in the fast round. Sometimes it's all of us in the fast round, but usually it's myself, sometimes the barbarian. Oftentimes the barbarian in the fast round. And so I'll be like, if I have some setup shop, which is not usual, and I'm not sending anything in there, basically, usually I'll send in the barbarian to do it, because then I'll then send in my companion, my Beastmaster companion, who doesn't have a great to hit, but can get the flanking advantage once the barbarian's in there. And that's actually better than just giving the barbarian a +2 to their hit. We talked about it last time, where we use those static bonuses instead of advantage disadvantage, which now that I've played in that system more and more and more, the less I like it. The more OP it becomes, unfortunately, because you can then get static modifiers in addition to advantage disadvantage on rolls, which makes things real easy to hit monsters real quick. And rolling high numbers in that system, that revised martial equipment, is really good because we do extra damage and extra effects happen if you roll really, really high. 5 or 10 above whatever the character's AC is. So that's primarily how I run. There's a lot of different ways to run an initiative, but that's the one that I like. The one that I've kind of alighted on is the fast and slow round, and monsters always take 10 on initiative. It's super quick. You write stuff down very quickly. Another way to do this, and I'm going to throw this back over to this real quick, is because I want to use this diagram. I'm talking about this. So, is to take a piece of paper and essentially and you kind of just make this diagram. You actually don't need to make the diagram at all, but you know where everybody is. Like, you imagine yourself, the DM, sitting, assuming you're playing at a meat space table. It works for virtual tabletops too, but we're using this illustration. So we're the Dungeon Master, Game Master here. I'm sitting here. Everybody's writing down initiatives. So rather than writing down people's names and putting them, and then resorting them into a line, I just write them down as this table is. You rolled a 10 where you are. I just write a 10, number 10. So I just make like a 5-star diagram. Like, okay, my monster goes on 11. This guy goes on 10. Our tank goes on 10. The rogue goes on 20. Our mage goes on 13. And our cleric rolls cleric initiative and they go on 4. I'm like, cool. So I know when it's my turn. I don't need to remake the list. I know where everybody is. I don't need to write down the names even. I just know where the numbers are in accordance with the people who are actually sitting around the table at me. Or if it's in Discord or VTT, you know, wherever their icons are in the bar. And you just assume those numbers. So I know, okay, well, who's got the highest number? Well, that's obviously the rogue. I only have to track 5 numbers. Look down and be like, okay, well, 20 is obviously the highest, so the rogue's going to go. Perfect. All right, the rogue has finished. What's the next highest number for 20? That's going to be our... that's going to be our mage, I think I said, with a 16. One of these guys has a 16, whichever one I said. They go next. And then the 13, and then I go as the monsters, and then our cleric goes to the bottom of the pack. And it's real easy. Like, you literally have to write down 5 numbers. Your initiative, everybody else's initiative, and by using a spatial recognition for it, it means that you don't have to resort them into a line or anything like that. You know whose turn it is, you know whose turn is finishing. You look down and look for what is the next highest number after that. That's the number. If you wanted to, you could also take arrows and point them around. I feel like for me that would add more confusion, but I think for a lot of other people that might create more clarity, and that's still way faster. You can still go through the first initiative and, all right, well, this person went on 20, then it goes down to the tank, then the tank goes over to them, they go to me, and then I go to the cleric, and that's the end. Then we go all the way back up to the top, and we'll make a little lightning pattern, and we'll know exactly how to go from there on. So, super quick. I think either one of those styles works a lot better than the standard initiative, which is like, you call for initiative, you write down all the different monster groups initiative individually, then you get everybody else's initiative, and then you take all your initiatives, and then you have to rewrite them into a line. The other hack that used to be a lot more popular, I don't think a lot of people use it nowadays, but it was exceedingly popular, I know, certainly during 4th edition, was that as the Dungeon Master, I just don't keep track of initiative. That's a player problem. I assign somebody at the table to be like, you're the initiative monkey. You're in charge of taking initiative and writing everybody down. I have enough to deal with. I have to deal with all the other aspects of the game. You can create a list and keep track of a list. Some players are better at this than others. Some players are surprisingly not good at this. I have met many of players who are not good at keeping a list, but there are going to be players who are good at it, and then you just make it their responsibility most of the time. And as a player who often that was my responsibility when I was playing, it's like a minute of extra work. It really doesn't take any time. I used to just write it directly on the battle. We would play with like a Chessex mat or something like that. I would literally just write it on the mat, just once I knew what it was, and just keep it from there. And then I could always just look down at it, and there's no flipping in pages or anything like that. Super easy, super straightforward. Knock it out. Or you can throw it in the VTT, right? They've got their own initiative things. So in addition, for other ways to create that fast, furious OSR style combat, OSR, by the way, has side initiative, which you could do, which is very, very, very close to fast, slow initiative. It's just slightly different. Basically, either you roll a d6, monsters roll a d6, whoever rolls the highest gets to go first. All the monsters go, all the PCs go. It's super simple. It works. It's not great because there's no like initiative bonuses and stuff like that in the older editions. So trying to do that with initiative bonuses is a little bit different because you want rogues or people who have abilities that allow them to switch initiatives or stuff like that are able to use that in some way. Doing the The fast and slow round still allows you to do that. So if you have somebody who rolls really well, like the cleric rolls really well, but they have that 5e24, the 2024 power, they can swap initiatives with a willing participant and be like, I'm in the fast round, but I don't actually need to be in the fast round. I'm going to give it to our rogue who just rolled a 1 and just rolled really poorly on their initiative, and so that way they can go first and do roguey kind of things. And I'll be the cleric at the end of the initiative, and that's a perfect place for me to be as a cleric, to heal people once people start getting hurt. So it actually helps me to be after the monsters. But also, maybe I want to throw out Bless, so maybe, sorry, I'm going to keep the top of the initiative so I can throw out Bless. Because we think saving throws are going to come our way, and I want people to have 1d4 on those attacks in the fast round. Other ways to do, so that's sort of the fast aspect. What about the furious aspect of combat? How to make it, we talked about making combat deadly, make it powerful, potent, that way. So, and here is, I think this is the OSR kind of mentality of that. The OSR mentality is generally you don't want to get into combats because combats, again, you don't get XP for monsters. Combats are often extremely lethal and a good way to get your characters killed. It's also a good way to alert all the other creatures to your location. So if you do sort of like this failure cascade of once you start fighting, you might end up doing a lot more fights than you want to. More lethality, more killability. Things can go really badly. It gets very close to what we now call the Colville Screw, the Matt Colville Screw, where that happens. Where you get in halfway into the dungeon and then everybody knows you're in the dungeon, they start descending upon you. Very similar. Where you don't see a lot of that in contemporary D&D, where it's just like, oh, nope, monsters sit in their room, and every room is soundproofed and padded, and they have no idea what happens outside of their perception of this one room. And so you can have an entire fight in another room, and the people next door don't ever come and check on you, even though you know you cast things like Shatter or anything that does like thunder damage. It makes a buttload of noise. And nobody ever comes looking for you. They're very polite, and they sit in their room until it's their turn to get killed. Which is a very different way of playing. Very different style of playing. Very video game-esque. It's like, nope, it's outside my cone of perception. Yes, technically you can see me. But technically I can't see you. And I can't hear my friends that you're killing. Even though you can see me, and you're killing my friends. So therefore it seems reasonable that I could see you. And see you and hear you killing my friends. Just to break down a little bit. What I'm trying to say. So when it comes to combat, my sort of idea about this is like, hey, once the way of force is chosen, once violence is chosen, you walk that path with purpose and confidence. You guys want to get into a fight? We're gonna have a fight. If the PCs are choosing violence over other options, most of the time, which is the very 5e24, very contemporary D&D thing, is that they're often very overconfident. They come from that background that's like, oh, every combat is like finely tuned to be the correct kind of challenge for who we are, and we know exactly how many monsters are in there. They're of that appropriate level, an appropriate number of them, appropriate CR, and an appropriate number of them to fight that we can win. And all you got to do is not do that, essentially. So what you want to do is you want to hurt them. If they're going to choose violence, they're saying, hey, hurt me. It's the person who throws that first punch. Like, as a dungeon master, you're like, well, I'm not necessarily going to throw the first punch, but I'm certainly going to try to throw the last punch sometimes. So if they choose that, you can hurt them. You want to put the fear of God in them. Be like, hey, you guys chose a fight that you don't really know anything about. You just walked in, big old ding dong swinging, thinking that you get that energy coming there, and you have literally no clue what you're coming up against. So this is where we do all that fun stuff. It's not just always hitting them with weapons. We do all this other fun stuff. We push them off of ledges. We drown them. We set them on fire. Have a monster grab one of the PCs and just start booking it away from combat. And they'll be like, wait, what? That carrion crawler, right? That carrion crawler knocks the person down, hits them with the paralysis, picks the PC up, and just starts booking it out of combat with them. immediately changes how the combat goes. It goes from, oh, well, we just kill this creature to, oh, no, this thing's taking our friend. We've got to stop it from doing that. So changing those goals, changing the motivations of combats is really, really helpful for that kind of stuff. Because remember, the carrion crawler wants to turn your friend into carrion because it eats carrion. So he's going to eat your friend. And oftentimes, some of the ways that I do this, when I start talking about Fast and Furious combat, I'd be like, okay, oftentimes in the campaign, I do it in the campaign that I run right now, it's like, if you decide to run from a combat, the monsters will not really pursue you. Like, you can't just run around the corner and be like, whew, yeah, that was a close one. Like, they're gonna try to chase you. Like, you have to, like, run from them. You have to legitimately run from them. But if you run from a combat, I'm not gonna rout you and hunt you down one by one and kill you. That's not fun. It's not fun for me. It's not fun for you. So I'm telling you just up front, above the table, I'm not going to do that. Now, same thing. If, when you run away, you abandon somebody, that's oftentimes one of the only ways I'll just straight out kill a character. Like, hey, your friend was bleeding out on the ground. You guys picked up and you left him. You left their hands in the whims of fate to be what will be. Monsters, probably just going to coup de grace that guy. Just going to kill him. Or, like I said, maybe they'll try to capture them if they're trying to ransom them or something like that. If it's the carrion crawler's just going to eat them. So if you abandon them, they die. Which means it's like you've got to grab them and like throw them over your shoulder and like firemen, no man left behind, like run them out of there if you want to save them. Same thing happens if there's a monster that can knock one of your friends down and can get your friend out of combat with your unconscious friend. Your friend's dead. That monster ate your friend. They're not coming back, unfortunately. Now, you could do some shenanigans once you get high enough level where you're like, well, we go chase down that monster and we cut him open and we get out, the bits of our friend that's inside and cut open their gut and spills out everywhere. And we're going to grab the half-digested chunks of our comrade and we're going to revivify them or whatever it is. We're going to cast whatever our level healing spell is where we only, need portions of them likely and get them back. But then that's its own thing, right? Now you're already changing the goals about what they're doing in the dungeon or whatever adventure you're running with combat shifts. Like they have new goals, they have new things they're chasing after, and that's always good stuff. They have to change their goals on their fly, decide what they're doing. So if you want to make your combats more deadly, that's a very easy way to do that. I'd be like, hey, especially they're really good to use with things like ghouls. Any creature, carrion crawlers, any creature that it's clear that they are here to eat you and your friends. And that doesn't mean they're going to eat all your friends. That means that they're going to do what most predatory animals do. And they're just trying to cull one from the herd. They're just going to try to get that juicy wizard that doesn't have any armor on. They're going to try to get them to the edge of the combat. They're going to try to disappear into one of these dark tunnels. If you let them disappear into the dark tunnels, you fully lose sight of them. And again, they're not sprinting away, like they're dragging somebody. Like they're pretty easy to catch up if you actually try to catch up to them. But if you let them get away with the unconscious person, or in this case, just paralyzed person, they're not even dead. They die. They just die. They get eaten. If you have monsters that will eat them. And then you have big bad monsters that will coup de grace people just to coup de grace them. Especially super evil, any sort of necromancers, death knights, characters like that who are capital E evil. They'd be like, look, they're also the sort of characters that are like, hey, you need to go focus on that wizard and cleric over there. Forget about these big dumb idiots with swords. We don't care about them. You can throw a rock and hit another dumb guy with a sword, strong guy with a sword. They're easy. There's tons of them out there. That guy over there, the guy that spent 5 years in the library learning how to cast fire, that guy's a problem. The guy over there that can bring down the wrath of the gods, that guy's a problem. Go deal with those guys, and when they're down, keep hitting them. I'll tell you when to stop. And so you can make bad guys really bad by doing that. So, play dirty. Be mean. Do it within the context of the game, though. You definitely want to make it clear that it's like, hey, I'm not singling anybody out here. It's just like you guys are fighting people who want to kick and scream and bite and stay alive, and you're trying to kill them, and they're going to try to stay alive and kill you too. This is one of the things that's sometimes very different. That 5e 2024 method. This is sometimes an older way to refer to this, but it's still pretty apt. Is that you want to play your D&D combats as a sport or as a war? So is it a sport as in like, hey, there's an equal number of opposition, an equal number of you guys, and you guys go until someone wins, and we know the conditions of winning are you kill all these guys, or they knock you out, or you run, or they run, or whatever it is. That's a very sport way, and it's like there's certain rules of engagement about how everything's going to go, or you want to play it like, as they call it, fantasy fucking Vietnam. Which is like, no, everything's awful. These people do terrible things to each other. They sick dogs on them. They smoke them out of holes. They have, kobold pit traps and stuff like that. Light people on fire, drown them, push them under stuff, all that kind of stuff. All that stuff where everything's on the table. You can also do play dirty and do things like, if you have that PC that's restrained, if somebody was in charge of these carrion crawlers with their paralytic stuff, if there was some sort of carrion crawler master, some sort of guy who's got like this weird carrion crawler insectoid helmet on or something like that allows them to maybe mind control them or who knows what, or just making stuff up just for fun. And the crawl master, we'll call it that. They're the crawl master. And so they've got this real nasty, like, it looks like it's made out of an actual carrion crawler's like carapace old head that they've killed and stuffed and put on there, and they use it as a helmet. Allows them to control that. Carrion crawler knocks this guy over, knocks that wizard over, paralyzed. Bad guy, thump, 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 walks over to him, grabs your wizard by the collar of his robe, lifts him up, and puts a blade to his throat, and demands, "Hey, surrender now, or I'm going to kill your friend." And this is when we break the stuff out. I make it very clear. It's like, hey, this is not like a D&D thing where it's just like, oh, if you don't do that, he gets advantage on the attack, and if he gets advantage on the attack, it's a critical hit or max damage or whatever it is. It's like, wizard's like, whatever. I got like 50 hit points. It's not that big of a deal. It's just a D4 from a dagger. It's not whatever. Be like, no, it doesn't work like that. It's like, hey, if you don't do something, no roll required. Your guy's paralyzed. He's got him in hold, and he's holding the blade against him. If you guys don't figure something out, the PC, he cuts his throat. That wizard immediately drops to 0 hit points and automatically fails 2 death saving throws. He is actively bleeding out right now out of his femoral artery. If you guys don't do something else right now. And that's a good, like, combat stopper. You can actually pump the brakes on combat and be like, now this becomes something else. We're still in initiative order, but it's basically you guys and this guy. And you decide what you're going to do. This would be a great use of like the command spells when something like the command spell is really super useful. Do something like that. You can throw in something like a suggestion is a great spell for here. Any sort of like paralysis, hold person, anything like that. If you have some sort of teleport to immediately get in their way, or you can take your turn to rush up and like push them away to like break the grapple and stand in their way. Anything like that where it's like, hey, you guys get the one turn to figure out whatever it's going to be. If it comes back around to the crawl master's turn, he's going to cut your friend's throat and he's going to die probably. Probably going to die. So you probably don't want that to happen. Hey, what's going on, Blaze Media? Nice to see you. How's it going? So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fun stuff you can do with that. That's where you sometimes get to bend or break away from the rules as written, and you change things up a little bit because there's not really anything that's like, sure, there's the coup de grace rules, but the coup de grace rules, as somebody who's played in the game where you jump down and you get the full Odysseus thing where you're like, you find the sleeping giant and you have a way to kill them. And you're like, cool, we sneak up on him and we stab him in the throat. Instead of like everybody doing crit damage and of course it being a giant having a billion hit points and be like, great, the giant doesn't die. That's not as fun as just being like, oh yeah, no, that giant's totally dead. you totally bypass this encounter by doing this. You probably wasted some spell slots. Might have done like a invisibility or a pass without trace or something like that to get you guys all in this killing position. And I might make it be like, hey, you guys think you can kill this giant in one shot, but you guys probably all need to be able to land a shot on this guy. Easy to do. He's unconscious, he's sleeping, he's helpless. So not hard to do. It's immediate crit if you do it. No need to roll damage, you guys will just straight up kill this guy. But if you guys don't all hit him, you're going to wake up to a very angry giant. Who's still going to have taken a lot of damage, but will wake up. Instead of being like, oh, you do everything you're supposed to, and then that still have to have a fight when you're trying to avoid it. In the OSR tradition, like we kind of talked about as far as Fast and Furious combat's often a fail state. It's also like basically the party screwed up in the negotiation or trying to sneak past to steal stuff from monsters. Because again, gold is XP in that OSR style. And so you actually don't want to fight monsters most of the time. It's really, really dangerous. Your hit points are low, you're going to die. So you generally don't want to fight them. You want to pay them off. You want to intimidate them. You want to set ambushes for them, which puts you in a really great position to kill them very quickly. But as things have moved to where that D&D 3rd edition plus, so basically WotC era D&D, let's say, combat is very much like a hammer, and when that becomes the primary way of getting XP in the game, style is very much, hey, whenever you see a problem, that problem becomes a nail. Good thing I've got this hammer called combat that I will do every time a problem comes. And this is how we get into those modes of play where people are like, well, my players never talk to anybody. They always just kill things. They're like, well, yeah, and when combat becomes the default solution for stuff. But if you put combats in there where if you try to fight these creatures, it's bad for you. It will do terrible things to your player characters. There's truly an idea that they might not make it out alive. They're going to be a little bit more gun shy around combat. They're not going to want to do combat as much. Not in it's not necessarily you're penalizing them for doing combat. You're just being like, hey, combat is an avenue for conflict resolution. It doesn't have to be the only avenue for conflict resolution. You can just try to talk to people. You can try to pay them up. This is very similar to so we just did the opening session. One of my friends jumped in to, like I said, run part of a new kind of like side campaign, I guess, on our Friday nights, in addition to the ones that I'm running. We're going to try to do a little trade-off. We'll see how it goes. My experience with those has not been super great, but I'm open to it. We'll see. So in that, our player characters, our party, kicked into this basement, classic level 1 thing where it's like, hey, go clear out the basement. Go in there, we see some weird stick, twig blight kind of looking things. Rest of the party, not my character, everybody else in the party is like, all right, well, we murdered these creatures. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not even gonna try to talk to them. All right. Well, that's not true. The bard did kind of try to talk to them, but that was after people had already started trying to kill them. So negotiations don't usually. Not a lot of conversation happens when you watch these people who just show up start killing your friends. Surprisingly, they're not super open to talking. But they also, I don't think, ever really attacked us, which is unfortunate. So it's like we immediately just kind of became the bad guys. My character, I feel by association, but hey, I was in the room. I didn't actively try to stop anybody there. Mainly because I don't really know these characters. But, yeah. That is very much a 5th edition, not 5th edition, but a contemporary D&D, WotC era D&D kind of thing. Whereas if you were playing more of an old OSR style game, we would have probably snuck down there, we'd see them, try to figure out what they're doing, see if we have any spells that, once we heard them speak, like, can we speak to these creatures? They don't seem to be violent, they don't have any weapons on them, they've been living down here for who knows however long. They seem to be worshipping a broomstick. So, doesn't seem to doing it. There's not like a big pile of dead bodies or something like that that shows that like they've done anything particularly bad down here other than just kind of be an infestation. So we could maybe do like a less than lethal solution. Might be a good thing to try out every once in a while. So that would be the OSR style. It'd be like, and we'd also do the OSR thing where we'd be like, well, we steal everything that's not nailed down because filthy loot, and then deal with the problem if we have to. And potentially look for some other ways. Again, you talk to them, you maybe just buy them off, maybe be like, hey, we'll get you out of here, we'll take you someplace it's where you guys can worship your broomstick in peace, I guess. I don't, whatever, man. Just, you're in somebody's home, and they paid us to kill you, so we don't really want to do that, so if you could just move, that'd be great. We'll help you move somewhere, I guess. So that helps to de-incentivize some of that combat aspect. So alternative leveling schemes help a lot. Currently, the way that I'm running in my current campaign is that for the group to level up, they need to bookend an adventure or plot story thread. So they have to bring something to a conclusion. I don't care how they do it. I don't care if they do it through violence. I don't care if they figure out how to persuade the characters some other path. I don't care if they, I don't know, find a way if they get the MacGuffin back by sneaking around and stealing something or negotiating with them for it or buying it off of them or whatever it is. Doesn't really matter. Bring the story thread to an end. It doesn't matter how. You get to level up. And I like that because it de-incentivizes combat. It's be like, if you want to kill them all, I guess you can. You're going to get a reputation for it for doing that, which will probably not be great. You're going to be more infamous than famous, but you know, it is what you want it to be. I'm fully the sort of dungeon master to be like, I will let you just make your mistakes, and the world will just respond to you guys being insane in an appropriate way. And that when they say book in the adventure, it's like they have to bring it to an end. That doesn't mean that they can fail the adventure. They can absolutely fail the adventure and still get a level out of it. If they stuck through the adventure to the end and they were like, hey, you know, it came down to the wire and we didn't pull it out. We weren't able to stop the cult from finishing their ritual, and now there's a new big bad thing, which is a new adventure for us. But that adventure, stopping them from summoning, Magoobliet or whatever, the aspect of Magoobliet. We didn't stop the goblins from doing that, so now they've got this paragon of Magoobliet that's running around. Well, that's a totally different adventure. You guys are going to level up. You can decide whether you want to deal with that right now, or maybe have some other irons in fire that you're going to deal with, and maybe you'll swing back on this. If you don't do anything with this now, might get more powerful, might become more dire if you don't do that. But maybe somebody else will take care of it. You don't know. And that tends to be the style of game that I kind of run, and I like that better, where it's just like, hey, even if you fail, you still did it, you stuck it out to the end, you're going to get the level up for sticking it out to the end, for basically not abandoning the adventure. But that also explains why I've run, over 24 sessions, and my party's still at level 2. But hey, every session you do that, things change in the world. Stuff gets more dire. Things go badly. And you guys slowly run out of money. Because you guys aren't making any money as adventurers, because you're not going on adventures. So there's that. And eventually, like, if they do nothing, eventually danger will show up to the doorstep, but that's really just because of where they are, not necessarily who they are. And I think one of the things I want to end right here on our Fast and Furious section, I want to talk about specifically morale. I said we were going to talk about morale, so we're going to do the thing where we talk about morale. Because I didn't think morale was worth its own section. Because morale is a very super easy way. It's a way to keep combat really fast. Most great combats last about 3 rounds. That seems to be about the sweet spot for D&D combat. Across editions, too. It's about 3 rounds. It's enough to get in there, do something, and finish it off. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. Those are your 3 rounds. Now, you notice when most people get bored with D&D combat is when you start getting 4, 5, 6, even more rounds. And combat goes stale because you're just kind of like whittling down hit points to bad guys. Most of the time when that happens, the momentum is lost. There is this balancing point in D&D combat where you have the fulcrum in the middle and you're like, are we gonna win? Are the bad guys gonna win? And so you start off kind of like that, right? And maybe based off the setup, you might be like, oh, the monsters have a bunch of advantage here. And so you're gently tipping the scales, tipping the scales, tipping the scales, tipping the scales, tipping the scales. Now, once combat becomes a very foregone conclusion, which happens about round 3, even if you don't kill the monsters, is like, it's very clear that the player characters are going to win it, or it's very clear that the player characters, well, it should be clear. Players are always a little blind to this, that the monsters are in a much better position than the player characters. And if things keep going like it's going, it's probably going to be a total party kill. Because you probably, by round 3, you probably got at least one person who's been KO'd, maybe 2 people who have been KO'd on the player character side. And they should be having a conversation at this point at the table about like, hey, do we run? This is really bad. Now players, because we said that 5e 2024, that modern D&D mentality is like, oh, well, you made a balanced encounter, so obviously this is a winnable scenario. Not every scenario is winnable. You unbalance those encounters. You're going to unbalance them. That's not guaranteed that every situation you walk into is one in which you can pull out a victory. Without some real good luck and some real good shenanigans. But you basically want to keep it, morale helps it keep it from being a whittle down whenever it's the player characters that are on the high end. When it's like you hit that round 3 and you're like, yeah, we're just whittling away hit points of this guy who's got, a bajillion hit points. But, we're not really in any danger of going down. We're in a very good tactical situation. We're just kind of, you'll get to this point where things will happen where characters like spellcasters are like, I'm just going to use cantrips because I don't want to use any big spells because we're definitely going to win this fight and I want to save some big spells for later. If you're getting to that point, then your combat's definitely stale at that point. And so how do you keep it from going stale? Well, you need some sort of shakeup. One of the things you can do is reinforcements arrive for the monsters. The monster might have some powerful ability they haven't used yet that can help shake up the status quo. This is where like layer actions are really helpful, stuff like that. Having something that they can run to, a big red button kind of style. Be like, hey, things are going badly. You watch the monster run over to, these barrels of gunpowder or whatever it is that are just situated around this pillar. And you're like, well, that's definitely a load-bearing pillar, and they are definitely lighting those barrels on fire. That's definitely going to explode. The ceiling's definitely going to come down. Anything that shakes up, like, oh, something different is going to happen. Or your third option is like the monsters can smell death on the air, and they start fleeing the battle, which is a very easy way to do that. And it changes anytime that we change those goals or motivations. Really helps. Now the player characters have to be like, do we chase those people who are running because they're going to go alert other monsters? Or do we let them go? Do we think it's okay if we let them go based off of the situation? What if some can't get away? Well, monsters that fail morale checks, the way that I run them, and they can't get away reasonably, they surrender. What are the PCs going to do with people who surrender? Do they kill unarmed surrendered monsters? That could be an alignment shift depending on who they are. It could be certainly will be, if anybody finds out about it, a smudge on their reputation and be like, oh, they like kill people, they kill prisoners. They're like, well, people are definitely not going to want to work with you, but definitely will, monsters, if they find out about it, will be afraid of you for sure. But you'll also galvanize them to be like, well, we've got to fight to the death because they don't take prisoners. So we're going to die anyway. So we might as well die here. Sword in hand, boots on feet. And okay, so morale checks. How do you do them? So it's very easy. There's in OSR style D&D, there's like a whole mechanic for it. As far as contemporary D&D, there's not. I think there is a mechanic for it. I think it's wisdom saving throw, actually. It's one of those optional rules that you can add in. And I think a lot of people use wisdom for morale checks. I like to use charisma instead. Just because I think it's sort of your confidence in yourself, your ability to pull stuff out, your ability to be cool under pressure, your ability to, be brave and courageous too. And I feel most of that stuff is more of a charisma stuff than a wisdom thing. Like, also, most monsters just have bad charisma, which means that they're going to fail the rolls a lot. So, because rather than come up with a mechanic for it, I just use the classic OSR style roll under mechanic. You just take a d20, you roll it. If you roll their charisma score or lower by looking at their stat block, they stay in the fight. If you roll above that, they flee. So, like, for example, the carrion crawler has a charisma of 5. That means that they have, and most bestial monsters have really bad charisma for some reason. You could argue that because they can't be magnetic or have presence, and I don't know. It's a weird thing. It's the same reason we don't give them a lot of intelligence. Intelligence kind of makes sense because they don't reason. Charisma is a little weirder because it's a very amorphous kind of ability score. So they have a 5 charisma. So if you get them to the point where they're going to make charismas, they need to make morale checks. There, you've got a 75% chance that this carrion crawler is going to try to book it out of combat, which is great. Now, when do we start rolling for it? Most of the time, now I have some other things that I do with this. Most of the time, it's they hit 50% of their hit points, which for the carrion crawler, they have 51 hit points. So once they hit 25 hit points or fewer, at the start of their turn, they immediately make morale saves every turn at that point. As soon as they fail, they run. Anytime they roll a 6 or better on the die, they will run, which will be most of the time. It's probably going to be that first roll. They will immediately try to run because they're not trying to die. The other time that I start rolling forward is if half of their side of the combat is gone. So we said we were trying to make this, I was thinking for a 5th level, I'll have to make this up. Let's do carrion crawler. Carrion crawler. There we go. Assuming we were making a fully balanced encounter here, I can actually. Alright, here we go. I'm thinking like 2 of these guys, and then I think we said like wolf. Yeah, because I was thinking something that was like a quarter. I mean, we could do maybe dire wolves, but dire wolves are large. I can a little bit smaller. Some of these guys. And I think it's gonna be like a 2-to-1. So this is where we're getting a little bit weird. I'll talk about this more, I guess, next time because we're already at like 3 hours. So I'm not going to go on for too much longer. I'm just going to kind of finish this section where we talk about doing different ways to look at this, where sometimes it's easier to look at hit dice because the CR calculation just doesn't work. And hit dice is a very OSR way to kind of determine roughly how lethal an encounter is by how many hit dice a monsters have versus the good guys. We have 5 level 4 characters, so that's 5 times 4. They have 20 hit dice. Carrion crawlers themselves have 6. If we have 2 of them in there, that's 12. I think wolves have how many? We'll just look. Come on. Here we go. They have 2 hit dice. Alright, so we had 12. So that leaves us with 8, so we can have 4 of these guys. And that's probably a little bit more appropriate. Well, what do you know? That's right on what I landed on. Which is 6. 6 versus 4 characters is pretty good. Generally don't want to have twice as many as the characters or half as many as the characters. That helps keep things balanced too. This should be, even though this says by the 2024 rules to be a very trivial encounter, which is wild, but it doesn't take, like I said, it doesn't take into account the things that we were talking about. So there's going to be deconstructed walls all over the place, ruined walls they can hide behind, then they can crawl over and get out of range of people. There's going to be either darkness or some other type of heavy obscurement that's going to make them difficult to find. I'll probably keep the keen senses because I wanted them to make it nice and easy for them to track down the characters in the concealment. So probably add that back in, or just use the 2014 rules, because they're a bit nastier. And then we're just going to reskin these wolves as being like carrion crawler, like, and I don't know, pupa, I guess? Not really larvae. Yeah, I guess like pupa, maggots, I guess. Massive, like people-sized maggots of these carrion crawlers. And they're going to do that. And so we can build that, and we got a nice little combat right here. What were we talking about? So we've got that. We've built that up. Here, I think you guys don't need to look at the outline stuff. So what I was going to say is that once we reach 50% of the creatures on the bad guy's side, so there are 6 bad guys to start out. As soon as there are only 3 left, regardless of how many hit points they have left, they're going to start rolling for saves because they've been cut in half. Their number has been cut in half, so combat's obviously not going well for them. So there's a high likelihood they're going to run for it. And the wolves as well, what is their charisma saving throw? 6. So 1 better, but still really difficult to make. So obviously if the player characters put up enough of a resistance, they'll run away. Which is fine. As we talked about previously, it's not about making these long drag-out fights. It's about making little tiny combats where we can cut them down a little bit. Where players now have to make that resource management game decision and be like, do I want to heal here? Do we want to take a short rest and spend hit dice? Do we want to, if we take a short rest in the dungeon, there's a chance that we're going to roll for a random encounter. We might not get that rest, and instead we might roll into another combat encounter, which we don't want, which we're not really going to get any reward out of. So it's a gambling act thing. Do we want to use a spell like Pass Without a Trace, which lasts for an hour, right? Pass Without a Trace lasts without an hour. Hey, guess how long a short rest is? An hour. So if we want to spend a spell slot to give us all a +10 to our stealth as we kind of hunker down in the corner of this dungeon, in a closet somewhere or something like that, and a little I was gonna say apps, not really apps, yeah, you know, a little corner somewhere, a crevice or something of that nature, where we can hunker down and kind of be hidden, and we get our +10 stealth, where we might actually make it through a combat, or make it through the short rest without a combat encounter rearing its head. Do stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, that's generally how I do it, is like it's half their HP or half the grouping is gone. And that's when I start rolling for it. Now sometimes I adjust that. Sometimes if they're really, really opportunistic, like random encounter monsters, like you guys are on the road and you get attacked by those Allosaurus, right? Well, the Allosaurus isn't really looking for a fight, they're looking for food. So if you show up, now Allosaurus, depending on what level you are, you're level 5 adventurers. So if you show up and you do a quarter of their hit point to them, which is probably not very much, you can probably do that in 1 or 2 attacks, they'll flee at that point. They're like, yeah, we're going to look for easier games somewhere else. I'm just trying to get a bite to eat. I'm not trying to get into a drag-out fight. So they'll flee. And yeah, 1 or more people would have taken damage in the encounter most likely, and that's the end of the encounter, and then you make the decision, do we heal up here? Do we go into the next encounter with some of us injured, instead of being at full health? So you really don't want them operating at full health very often, or want to find ways where they have to make the choices, like if you want to be at full health, you're going to have to use these limited resources to get there. And again, every time that you do that short rest, there's always a chance that you might accidentally bungle your way into a new encounter that you weren't planning for, and then it kind of cascades. Now that threat is pretty low. It's generally pretty low. Rolling for encounters, I roll a 1d6. If you roll a 1, you get a random encounter. So super easy if you're just like resting, and there's a 1 in 6 chance that you're going to roll into an encounter, but most of the time you'll make it through a short rest, no problem. And I'd probably roll with advantage if they were doing something like Pass Without a Trace or something like that. Or make them have a stealth check. I don't know. I might do it back and forth different ways. But that's the easiest way to do it. So it's like, if you're looking to make combat fast and furious, so if you want to make it furious, get mean, do mean stuff, use your environment, do things like trying to hold characters captive, trying to, like we said, if you take that hostage and you put a blade to wizard's throat, and our crawl master puts the blade to the throat, we can immediately end the combat right there, and the combat now becomes a social scene, social RP scene. If everybody throws down their weapons. Because this one person's like, I can't really take all these people captive. There's no way I'm going to be able to do that. Even I'm in control of these monsters, but these monsters aren't like, they can't tie people up and stuff. So will it break down? You know, there's going to be a negotiation. We're going to change it. It might slip back into combat, might not. You know what happens? They might come to some negotiation. They might come to something might happen with it. It just kind of depends. And that's cool, but that's an easy way to end combat. But in general, if you want to speed up combat, if you can make the start of combat faster and the end of combat faster, you're only left with that ooey gooey middle part of combat, which is the part that everybody likes. That's the part where we're like, we don't know if we're going to win or not. So if you focus in on that point and then be like, okay, once we know who's going to win, we're going to try to get out of combat as fast as possible as the dungeon master. And be like, okay, they're going to start making morale saves. They're going to start running from combat. They're going to get out of here. Do you want to stop them from running because you assume they're going to go get they're going to go get reinforcements or something like that? That's a good way to, by changing something in the combat, by changing the stakes of the combat, we changed stuff in the combat, a shakeup. We did that combat shakeup. Now it'd be like, oh, if we chase them, now there's a new goal in combat. And so we kind of start that over again. It does feel like you're starting from round one again, where it's like, okay, now initiative's really important because this person's running away and you guys are chasing them. And how are you stopping them? It's like, okay, well, I'm going to use ensnaring strike, and I'm going to use hold person, and I'm going to, I am just going to firebolt them, or I'm going to do mold earth, and I'm just going to try to throw dirt in front of them to try to stop their way. Or I'm going to dash and I'm going to try to catch up to them. All that sort of fun stuff. Then it becomes a different kind of encounter. Transitions of combats into chases is really fun if you can keep doing that and you can keep running an initiative. Very fun. But yeah, we want to focus in on that ooey gooey center. So anything we can do to speed up combat in the beginning, that's the initiative thing, which is the thing was like, what does that happen? There's that's that sequence break in play where you're like, playing's going back and forth. You guys are sneaking through this area. It's deep darkness and this heavy fog that's in the area, and you can't see things, but you can hear stuff moving around in this room. Put your hands up and you feel these heavy worn stones. They feel broken. You kick some rocks underneath your feet as you're moving around, and you guys freeze as you kick these rocks. We'll call that a failed stealth check on somebody's part. You hear that, and things clicking in the background. Deep, it's throaty. What is this thing? And you hear the shuffling of a large creature, larger than you, maybe larger than all of you put together. And then you hear a second one moving, of a similar size. And then you hear other things moving, smaller but more numerous. And that exploration eventually will turn into that combat with the carrion crawler and the crawler master. And then it can break out into a chase as people run away, or they run back into this fog to be hidden again from you. And then you're like, do we chase them into the fog and try to hunt them down, or do we just try to book it out of here and just let bygones be bygones and hope we find out a different way to get back to the entrance where we don't have to come through this room again? Then the game becomes a lot more interesting to play, rather than walk into room, kill all monsters in room, walk into next room, kill all monsters in next room, loot, rest, repeat. Room, kick in door, kill monsters, loot, rest, repeat until you get through a dungeon. So if you can change up that very boring progression and make fights faster, more furious, we want to make that combat very lethal. It's like, hey, if you decide to go by the combat option, we push the combat lever all the way over to 10. That knob goes all the way to 10. This knob goes to 11, actually. You go all the way to 11 and be like, look, it's gonna be a tough drag out fight. These people are actively trying to kill you in very nasty ways. You're trying to do the same to them. So we get away from sort of that, like, D&D is a sport, and everybody waits very politely in their little combat room where there's nothing in there except them, basically, that's to be interacted with. And you go from one room to the next room. You just do fights. You do a fight. We're going to be really nice and let you get a short rest in between every single fight, so that way you can always fight with all your hit points and Most people have all their abilities. And then, of course, yeah, you guys can take a long rest in this dungeon. Why not? No monsters come. You want to break that stuff. Don't make dungeons. Don't make any place that's not a safe haven, like some sort of village or city like that, safe. It should be dangerous. They're very dangerous places. Your player characters should not feel at ease while they're there. They should feel basically terrified the entire time they're there. They should only want to be there for as long as it is necessary to accomplish whatever their goal is for coming in here. They don't want to hang out here any longer. That is the dungeon ethos that we're trying to create. Like, this is a bad place. You don't want to be here. Get out of here as fast as possible. You don't want to be on this mountain. You want to run in here, and you want to grab Wise Halamith. You want to get the information out of him, or you want to take him off this island, off this mountain, before everything on this mountain tries to kill you and him. Yeah, the Spinal Tap reference, absolutely. With a very tiny Stonehenge that you find in this cavern. But yeah, I think that's everything that we're going to have time for today. There's a lot more to this section. I just didn't realize I had this much to say about it. I thought I had less to say about it. I don't. So next time, maybe not the next stream, but the next time we'll pick this up, we'll talk more about... We did Combat is Deadly and Fast and Furious combat, some morale checks. Next time we'll talk a little bit more about player ingenuity and unbalancing encounters. We touched a little bit on it today, but there's quite a bit more that I want to talk about on that. Those might be that might be a lesser thing, even though I've got them all planned out. We could go into it, but no, it's too late. It's too late. I've spent too much time. We'll just have to wait for the... maybe we'll do this next week. Unless something goes horribly awry, I'm planning to be streaming next week, so we'll see. But that's it for me, this one. Hopefully this is useful for you to kind of look at how you can pull in some of those OSR elements and pull them into contemporary D&D and get some of that juicy, succulent OSR combat dish with all those herbs and spices we like, without it having to be, something we need to bake for 8 hours or something like that. We want to make it easy to pull in some of that stuff and make that really make the flavors bloom with that 5e 2024 style of play by taking some of the best stuff from the history, the tradition of D&D, without necessarily having to play something like an old school Essentials, where we're going to lose all the stuff we actually like about contemporary D&D, specifically in 5th edition and 2024. That's it. If you like this kind of content, you should hit like. If you want to see more of it, you should subscribe. We try to do this at least once a week. We see. Sometimes I post, sometimes I do it more, sometimes I don't. We'll see. Unfortunately, it's just kind of a hobby for me, so whenever it gets done is when it gets done. If you want to see us do some other stuff, even though I haven't been very good at it, there's a second channel. It's in the description. You can check it out, where we're doing the VODs for our Twitch streams, so you can check out the Twitch streams. Again, I've been super great at doing them. I need to be better at them. Where we've been playing through, been doing the Shadows of New York, which is a visual novel of World of Darkness Vampire Masquerade. Interesting. So we'll probably do some more of that whenever I get around to it. I was actually going to do it yesterday, but I ended up being pretty tired, so I felt like I didn't really have it in me to sit down and try to make up voices for 2.5 hours. But we'll get back to it. I'll do it. Until then, I'll see you guys later. I hope this helps your games, improves them, and we'll see you next time. All right? Bye, guys.